Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Grillin' JR with the voice of wrestling, Jim Ross. Jim, what's going on, man? How are you?
I'm good, buddy. I'm really good. I am not recovering from a hangover like somebody else on this line might be, but I'm feeling good. I feel good. It's a busy week. It's a huge week. I hope that everybody that I know and that are affiliated with any part of AEW, whether it be as a fan, a wrestler, office person, whatever it may be, fully understands how magnificent an opportunity we have debuting on TNT. So it's a big week, and so I'm excited about it. To be honest with you, I started figuring out what I'm going to pack yesterday as we record this on Monday. Sunday, I never do that. I'm very anxious to get on the road, very anxious to get this process started. So it's going to be a momentous week without question.
Well, and of course, what we're talking about is the debut of AEW on TNT, which by the time you're listening to this happened last night. And then, believe it or not, tomorrow night, SmackDown is coming to Fox, and it kicks off on Friday, October 4th with the 20th anniversary celebration at 7:30 Eastern. The 20th anniversary show has a huge lineup of WWE superstars and legends, including Hulk Hogan, Roman Reigns, Goldberg, Becky Lynch, Sting, The Undertaker, Ric Flair, and of course Stone Cold Steve Austin. The 20th anniversary show also marks Brock Lesnar's return to SmackDown, as he's going to be challenging Kofi Kingston for the WWE Championship. In its 20-year history, SmackDown Live has helped launch the careers of pop culture icons, including Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, John Cena, Triple H, the Bella Twins, and more. And now we're entering the Fox era of SmackDown. Friday Night SmackDown on Fox will bring you edge-of-the-seat action, unpredictable drama, and world-class athleticism to primetime television every Friday night for 52 weeks a year. No off-season here. The WWE is joining Fox to create the greatest lineup in television, with Thursday Night Football, Friday Night SmackDown, Big Noon Saturday, and of course, Fox NFL Sunday. So here we are, October 4th, the greatest night in the history of superstars the WWE has ever seen. Don't miss the premiere of Friday Night SmackDown on October 4th at 7:30 Eastern, only on Fox.
I can't believe they didn't invite me because, I was the first voice heard ever on SmackDown. Lawler and I were the first two broadcasters. We were the original team. And I'm being facetious, but having been in LA a couple of weeks ago for the Oklahoma UCLA game and spending the weekend with my good friend Jacob Wellman, who's the senior VP of Fox Sports, they meaning Fox, has done an amazing job of creating awareness on their securing the brand of SmackDown and the partnership with WWE. So they're a magnificent partner, no doubt about that. So I wish everybody there the best of luck. I don't look at this thing like it's us against them or them against us. It's a wrestling show. We have a wrestling show at AEW. There are other companies that have wrestling shows. So I don't understand what this Wednesday Night War thing, and everybody's got, and especially when it comes to picking a side. I understand the terminology of Wednesday Night War because people are hanging on the coattails of the Monday Night Wars. I get that. But it certainly doesn't necessitate we wrestling fans to single out one brand as our do-all, go-to, end-all, be-all, and take a crap on the other wrestling products. I think that's stupid. I think it's nearsighted and somewhat ignorant, goofier than a pet coon, if you will. So let's support all the business. And as all the business grows, we all will benefit from it. It's that simple to me.
Yeah. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, as a wrestling fan or as someone who works in the business, if you were one of the boys, it's good for there to be competition, and competition is heating up. I'm sure by now, everybody has seen the debut of AEW on TNT, and it'll be curious where we go from here. And that's really what this show is about, is taking a look at the history of professional wrestling. And man, the Monday Night War, once upon a time, was the hottest thing in wrestling. And by the fall of 97, WCW had a firm grasp on the lead. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. In Your House, Bad Blood, going down October 5th, 1997 from the Kiel Center in St. Louis. So, as you're listening to this, the anniversary is just a couple of days away. It's an interesting show because there's so much going on behind the scenes. So we're going to tackle it a few different ways. But if you actually sat down and watched the show this week in preparation of us talking about it, I'd be curious to see what you thought of the show. The readers of the Wrestling Observer went ahead and placed their votes. 52% gave the show a thumbs up, 16% gave the show a thumbs down, and 31% gave the show a thumbs in the middle. You watched this show for the first time in a long time. Overall, would you have given this show thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in the middle?
I think it was a thumbs up for a lot of reasons, not just that night, because I thought the show was very strong, and the main event delivered infinitely. Just Shawn Michaels and Undertaker had a classic, and they had the first Hell in a Cell match that counts. So there's so many firsts here. We saw the DX start percolating and becoming an entity, and an important entity. We saw the transition and how Stone Cold's neck injury at the hands of Owen Hart, how that affected, and how that presentation was, how it affected the WWE. Because in August, just a couple of months before, Steve, it didn't look good for Austin. So there's a lot of things at play here, and everything that I just mentioned at play. In addition to Bad Blood, it was the last, the talent. It was Vince McMahon's last gig as a broadcaster on that show. He worked with Lawler and I, or we worked with him, however you want to term it. But then Vince soon thereafter would become Mr. McMahon, and Lawler and I would be handling the Raw show. And I'm happy for Jerry. Jerry's gone back on Raw, and he's got something to do on Monday nights, and I'm sure he's excited about that opportunity. So, but in any event, I digress. This event, Bad Blood '97, had so much history involved in it that Conrad and I will talk about here today. I think you'll find the show to be very interesting and very eye-opening in some respects.
Well, what is eye-opening, if you've never seen it, is the main event. The very first Hell in a Cell, as you referenced, Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker, was certainly one of the best matches of the year. And '97 had a lot of great matches, with WrestleMania 13 being Bret Hart and Stone Cold Steve Austin. And of course, this same month on the other channel, Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero were going to tear it up at Halloween Havoc. So lots of fun wrestling happening in '97, and fans knew it. This show was a sellout. 21,151 fans. 17,400 of those had paid a gate of $212,000, plus another 101,000 in merch sales. So this would have been the second largest crowd in the long and storied history of St. Louis wrestling, trailing the famous Strangler Lewis Jim Lundo Stadium match in '34 that drew 35,000. But that's feels like another lifetime, and it literally is. So this is quite the record for the WWF. You guys had been sort of limping along. We talked about when we covered Mind Games, and we talked about that Raw at MSG. That's where Vince would meet with Bret and tell him he couldn't afford his contract. So it's got to be pretty encouraging when the next month you run a big wrestling town like St. Louis and you got 21,000 fans on hand. That's a big house in any era.
Absolutely. And it showed that some of our talents that we're counting on, would continue to develop and understand the art of getting over, understand the art of drawing money and becoming stars. And as we progress in this podcast today, a lot of those guys will be singled out, and they have gone on to become Hall of Fame guys. But Bad Blood was a key event in that regard. Great competition with WCW, and we just had to continue to steer the course. Sometimes when you make your play, it's like a football team deciding we're going to run a different offense. We're changing offenses here, and we're going to try to do something a little bit different to better parlay and suit our talents and their personalities. And so the Attitude Era started, the evolution of that really started around this time, I think. And Bad Blood was just almost an infomercial for that, because there's a lot of attitudinal things that were going on. But again, anytime you have a show that has a wonderfully produced, executed main event, that becomes the last thing you remember. Anybody that watched Bad Blood in preparation of the show, you may forget some of those tag matches early in the night that didn't have a story behind them or just weren't red hot. Everything can't be red hot. Everything doesn't need to be red hot, quite frankly. And so all of a sudden, those things that were important to be the main events that needed to be hot were. And then some over-delivered, including HBK and Taker.
It's interesting to see how the crowd is responding to what you guys are serving up. You know, we're coming off the Ground Zero pay-per-view, which went down in September, also Shawn Michaels and the Undertaker, but we don't have a clean in the middle finish. So we're going to a cage match here, pretty old school. I mention this though, because that same match on top, couldn't even sell out a 6,000 seat arena. It drew 4,963 paid. I don't know why, but that's just really intriguing to me that just 1 month later, either the product is much hotter or the town is much hotter. How do you justify in your mind's eye as a performer or as somebody who's worked in the office, how one town can be so hot and the other just dead?
Well, you got to go back and look at the history of the town and how if the town is sucking hind teat, it may be because the shows preceding this one were not good. There could have been some no-shows, could have been a lot of things, could have been weather issues, a lot of things. Bottom line normally is that it's just simply not what we didn't provide what the fans wanted to see with enough enthusiasm to sell out the building. I'm thinking that 6,000 seater was probably booked a year in advance, probably was with all the planning that Ed Cohen and his staff used to do. So I'm thinking that perhaps it was simply a matter of, it was already booked. We weren't that hot at that time. 6,000 seats seemed to be appropriate for where we were in our evolution of our new talents. And so when it was booked, it probably made a lot of sense. As things started getting hotter, which all means this, talent started getting over. You know, Undertaker almost got a whole new, he got resurrected, so to speak, no pun intended there. Austin's evolution is well documented. Nobody before or since has been like Austin. We had him, young and all, he was, I think when Steve got hurt, he was 32. So we just, and DX, that was a big thing, getting Shawn Michaels back in the hunt. And that was a big deal, and getting him motivated and getting him rolling, because when Shawn had the mindset to be great, he was as great as anybody that's ever wrestled. So, and he could also be a giant pain in the ass. As which I'm sure he would agree, and he has talked about this. His attitude changed a lot, and so, but that's the whole deal, man. Sometimes those deals are made a year in advance or whatever, and it could have been a favor that Ed had to pay back a favor to the building group, so to run that event and to run it in your house and book it a year in advance might have seemed like a logical thing to do at that point in time. But little did we know the card a year in advance was going to be the first ever Hell in a Cell match, because nobody knew what Hell in a Cell even was. We had never had one. So it could be a lot of reasons, but I'm with you, Conrad. Just on the surface, without peeling the onion back a little bit, it is a little suspect why we hit such a small building. But there's all kinds of stories behind that deal. I can promise you, if we had thought that we're going to sell 21,000 seats, then you're going to jump on that, because that's over $500,000 gate. And so just on the gate alone, talent's going to be making, 5-figure payoffs easily.
Well, let's talk about what's going on with Stone Cold. He goes to see Dr. Joseph Torg in Philadelphia, and he is a neck specialist that we've probably mentioned here on the show before. He's still injured from the SummerSlam injury. I think we've covered that at this point. And the prognosis is he's going to be out for a minimum of 2 months. And it's written in the Observer, among other injuries, Austin, 32, suffered a bruise of the spine, along with his fairly significant neck problems that were a combination of both the recent jar and the cumulative effect of the wear and tear over his wrestling career. So you guys are obviously monitoring this closely. When you hear that Steve is out for 2 months at the beginning of September, so you're thinking, all right, we'll have him back, game day ready for action early November. He'll be back for Survivor Series. Were you getting conflicting reports or how confident were you that he'd be able to come back from this?
Well, we were hopeful, obviously, because we knew that we had stumbled on to the hottest thing that we'd had in years, maybe in ever, arguably. But there was no guarantee, Conrad, that he was coming back. The diagnosis was, if he heals as we think he can, and he might, then if those stipulations are in place, you might get him back in a couple of 3 months. But a lot of things had to happen and get in play before that was possible. And I know that he start with football and things like that, but we weren't realize the stenosis, the narrowing of the spinal cord. So there was no guarantee when he was coming back, and you can't book him. You can't go out. When I was booking the house shows at that time, and I couldn't go down to my booking and go, okay, I'll do 3 months here, then I'll book Steve this card in 3 months, because it would have been false advertising, because we weren't sure that he was going to come back during that time frame or ever. So it was very touch and go, very, very tenuous, nerve-wracking to say the least, that, you want to get your guy back you're planning on giving a bunch of carries to. So it was challenging to say the least. Every day we got updates. I made more than one trip to San Antonio from Stanford to go check on him. He saw a great doctor there named Lloyd Youngblood. I believe that's the fellow's name. He was great. And here's the thing. He was local. He was a neck expert, and he was local for Steve. And Steve trusted the guy. And that really meant the world. He found a doctor that he really trusted, and he could be in his comfort zone at home in San Antonio to probably got that taken care of. So no guarantee, man. There's no guarantee at all. It was very hand wringing. We weren't sure. And so every day I would be on the phone with Steve or Deborah, his wife at the time, and make sure that what's going on? How's he feeling? How you feeling today? You got the tingling or this, that, and the other. And he was going through a gambit of emotions. Steve's a very emotional guy, and that's one of the things that has made him great in the things he does. He's very, very passionate, and so he was in peaks and valleys, Conrad, on his moods, because he didn't know either. He didn't know if his career, and he was making a lot of money. Hey, just on that house of $500-something grand, just on the house, he'd have made approximately $25,000 that night.
Well, this house is $212,000 here for Bad Blood.
I know, but I'm talking about the Bad Blood house is $500,000, right?
No, Bad Blood was $212,000.
Was it really?
Yeah.
I'll be damned. Okay, well, so he'd have made over $10,000 on the house alone, 5% of the net gross, and then he got pay-per-view money. So. Right. Point being is that he had never made that kind of money in his whole entire life. It had been 7 years starving in Memphis, working, in Dallas, which is, a dysfunctional world. So he finally got to where he wanted to be with that one stop off in ECW, and here we hire him. And then, he was very moody, very emotional, that his dream was over. And all I could ever do was just continue to encourage him that your dream isn't over. It's not over until the doctor tells you it's over, and he hasn't said that. So give Mother Nature a chance to heal your big ass, and then let's see what happens.
You mentioned a minute ago that, you would call the house and check in with him, and I'm sure timeline just runs together. But at this time, Deborah was still married to Steve, and I think Steve was married to Jeannie Clark. What was that dynamic like in late 97? I mean, we know that, just reading the tea leaves, that Jeannie and Steve are going to get divorced in 99. Does him being home this time add added pressure? Because Rick has talked about on the old Ric Flair show that he didn't know how to be home after years and years of being on the road all the time. When he's actually home after his retirement, he didn't know how to be home. That wasn't something that he had ever experienced in any of his relationships before, because he was always gone.
First of all, I apologize for those two. So the marriage is confused. Well, here's the thing. Steve was facing the heartbreak of not being able to get back in the ring and continue this amazing run that he's just started. We're just getting released and rolling. And he was living in a bad marriage. So him being at home wasn't good at all. And so I messed up. He had his surgery with Youngblood later on. But, you know, he wasn't in a good spot. He wasn't in a good space right there. And that's why I think that, you know, calling him on a regular basis and sending little notes or whatever helped him. It let him know that we were still thinking about him. You know, I'd encourage Vince to call him every now and then when he could. And so, but it wasn't a good environment for Steve. It wasn't the ideal healing environment. With his career in jeopardy and his marriage in jeopardy, it wasn't a great place to be for him.
Well, in the WWF ring is where he really wants to be. And you guys have got to find a way to keep some attention on him, keep him in front of the audience, keep him hot, but you've got to be creative because he can't wrestle. And unfortunately, he's got a lot of hardware. He's one half of the tag team champs and he's the Intercontinental champ. We know at Ground Zero, they're going to crown new tag team champions, and unbelievable to say it's the Headbangers who wind up winning, which we've talked about before. And the stunner on these authority figures is what we're going with. During this time, you catch a stunner, Sergeant Slaughter catches a stunner, and famously at the Madison Square Garden Raw, Vince would take the world's worst stunner. Who comes up with the idea of him rebelling against, you know, the authority figures and just issuing stunners since he can't wrestle? Because this is something that, in hindsight, if he wasn't hurt, I don't know that this would have worked as well. This probably helped him get over just as well or as fast as anything he could have done in the ring would have.
People love to see the stunner delivered. We've seen that lately. When he goes back to Raw a few weeks ago, Steve was talking about, pardon me, he was the biggest star on the card. That includes all the guys that they're paying massive money to right now today to be main eventers and sell tickets. Nobody in the current WWE roster is as over even today as Austin is today. And on that occasion, back in those days, you know, in that era, he was Hogan-like in his evolution. There was just something there that every time you saw Austin in person, you were impressed, and it was a memorable moment without a question. So we did what we could do with him. The thing about him not being able to wrestle, the real deal was he wasn't able to take bumps right at that point in time. But he could then sure deliver a stunner, because the stunner, he landed on his ass, and he could control that pressure. He could control the impetus of it, and people came to see the stunner, just like they did last time he was on television. So it was daunting. But the one thing that they loved more than anything, other than him drinking beer, was the stunner, and he could do both those things under his current medical situation. He could drink beer, and he could stun people, and he could talk. So we did the only thing that made sense, that was within the confines of being safe for him, and while all the while still entertaining the audience, because they got to see what they wanted to see.
The September 8th Observer would report that Mark Henry was headed to Calgary to train under Bret Hart and Leo Burke. Quote, WWF is trying one last prayer to see if they'll ever get anything out of their multi-million guarantee contract that gave Henry before the Olympics. Whose idea is it to send him north?
Well, I think that I was involved in that, and I think there are others in the administration that were involved in it. Vince signed off on it. I want to say, if I'm not mistaken, Conrad, that Bret Hart had ample amount to do with this decision, because Bret had been trained by, at certain points, had influence from Leo Burke. And Leo was a Canadian wrestler, very sound fundamentally, had a lot of respect from the guys because of his ability to coach and teach and refine one's game. and Mark needed essentially some one-on-one tutoring and coaching him up. Mark was always very good at being coached up, more often than not. Once he got a little bit of seasoning, and once he got some experience within the locker room, and then he was very coachable. Mark's also a smart guy. He knew that, some were running out of patience with him, and administratively. I think Vince is one of those guys. Here's the thing, man. You get a 400-pound guy that could dunk a basketball, that's regarded as legitimately the strongest man in the world. I just believe the old promoters deal that you got to try everything humanly possible to get him up to speed so he can contribute. That's the potential that he had. At least that was my thought.
What was Vince frustrated at?
His lack of progression. He just wasn't developing as quickly as we had hoped. He wasn't smooth, and it wasn't a tight fit for him as far as the tightness of his match. Sometimes Mark tried to do too much, and we didn't need him to do those things. He just needed to be the strongest man in the world and use his strength as his ticket to get him into the dance, and then continue to evolve, which he did. So I'm glad that we didn't wash our hands of Mark, and that we didn't release him. And the multi-million-dollar deal. I guess it is multi-million. I think he's making about $200,000 a year, something like that. 10 years, $2 million. But it was like he got paid, NFL money.
Right.
He got good money, Conrad, but the money he was getting paid was not. He was making about $4,000 a week, something like that. So it wasn't killing the house. It wasn't killing the McMahon's retirement plan, obviously. So maybe that's a little bit overspoken. I'm not sure. But he just wasn't evolving and developing. So that meant to me that for whatever reason, the distractions in some of those camps, either with his peers, and Mark, a very competitive guy. So when you see your guys racing by you and getting better and better in the ring, it can affect you in a lot of different ways. So we just felt like Mark needed some more individual attention. He needed to get away from, he would change his environment. But that was my thought, get him out of this. What we're doing isn't working. And we think that this guy can make it to be a big timer if we can just get him over the hump fundamentally. So that needed to be, in our opinion, a change of attitude and a change of surroundings. And so we did that. And I think Leo Burke helped Mark Henry a great deal. I'm sure Mark would have agreed to that.
Well, let's talk about something that you guys were doing on the house shows that we never saw on TV. You start to announce for like the dark matches after all. For instance, the one at MSG in late September, Bret Hart versus Shawn Michaels versus the Undertaker in a triangle match. It's curious to me. These are the biggest 3 stars in the company, especially with Steve sidelined. That was never a pay-per-view. And it feels like there would have been a great opportunity. Of course, we know Bret's not long for this world. He's going to be out of here in about another month, but what could have been, man, those 3 at the top of their game in a 3-way that had money all over it.
Yeah, it sure did. But this did come up. Timing is everything. And it just wasn't the right place at the right time. There's no doubt. Hey, look, I would not have booked that main event in the Madison Square Garden if I didn't think it was going to draw, obviously. Because the Garden is Vince's, at that time, was Vince's pride and joy. And, it's a family tradition of the WWF, WWE, and the Garden. So that was the deal there. It was a big card. It was a match I thought would help draw, and it did. Why wouldn't it? And I don't remember what the house was that night, all those years ago, but I'm sure that big show in the Garden did very well at the gate. No doubt about that.
We just covered it recently. If you want to check it out on both Bruce Pritchard and Eric Bischoff's podcast. So if you want to know more about that MSG Raw, we've got plenty there for you. Meltzer would have an interesting note. Meltzer gets it right most of the time. Here's one where maybe he missed. The idea of having Michaels, Rude, and Helmsley as the new clique is already out the window, although they may put Michaels in with Helmsley as they're trying to find a way to elevate Helmsley to the next level. How much of the pairing with DX, Shawn Michaels and Hunter Hearst Helmsley, was because that's what Shawn wanted? versus it's what the office thought would help get Hemsley over?
Well, we thought that putting Rude in that group because of his name identity and his background, and track record, et cetera, was on paper a viable idea. But the thing is that Shawn and Hunter both had their own ideas as to what their faction should resemble, represent, and be positioned as. So, and I noticed this years ago when I worked for Cowboy Bill Watts. He'd bring a guy into a territory, a heel, let's say, normally a big heel because Watts is a 300-pound baby face, and he would consult with that heel about the best ways that the heel has been utilized to get over. And so the guys that Watts bring in, a lot of these top guys, had a hand in their own program. But what we're going to do this week, we'll do this. Oh, we're going to have a 6-week program. We're going to have a program that's going to run all summer. And so then they would collaborate on those efforts. I don't see anything really that much different in this deal. The last thing you want is for something that has that much potential to be not to be forced, and it doesn't do the talent any good. So Hunter and Shawn felt like they had the right formula. They did, by the way, and so we went with it. So, and Rude at the end of the day just didn't fit in there. Where you would see at TV, you'd see Rude, all three of these guys at television, let's say, well, you'd see Shawn and Hunter together doing something, maybe at catering or hanging around talking to somebody. Then Rude was felt like the lone wolf. He didn't really fit into their group in that respect. So I think that was kind of where that went. It was a good idea on paper, Conrad. It just wasn't practical as it relates to these talents who had their own ideas of what they wanted to do.
I can't wait to talk about what Shawn Michaels did on Raw. We'll get there in just a minute. But the day after Ground Zero, Sergeant Slaughter comes out to open up the Monday Night Raw and strips Steve Austin of the Intercontinental title, and then announces a new tournament to crown a new Intercontinental Champion. Of course, this is the opportunity where Steve sees to stun Sergeant Slaughter. So Sergeant Slaughter becomes an authority figure as the commissioner to catch a stunner. And the day after that, they do another set of Raw tapings, and this is one of the more famous Raw incidents and stories of the year. It's September 9th, Muncie, Indiana. There's about 9,000 fans in the crowd. Lots of physicality, but what people remember the most is that this is a show where neither Vince McMahon or The Undertaker are here. And The Undertaker is going to appear to retort whatever promo that Shawn is going to cut in ring, but Undertaker will just be appearing in a pre-taped segment on the Tron. And Shawn takes it upon himself, since he knows it's not live, to ruin this promo as much as he can. He comes out in his underwear, which he is stuffed now with a sock or something. He's going to jump up and down, crotch chopping directly into JR's face so they can't shoot around this thing he stuffed his pants with. And then he starts to back talk and go off script and call out the Undertaker and say that he's a chicken if he won't come out and fight him now, knowing full well the Undertaker is not there in the building. So when word gets back to Undertaker that he's calling him out and embarrassing him in front of the crowd, he doesn't like that. And supposedly, when Vince hears what Shawn has done here in the ring with this promo, he's not happy either. You were there, holding the microphone as he's thrusting and gyrating in your general direction. Did you have a sense that something is going to be difficult today? He's extra cantankerous since Vince isn't here. When did you know, well, this is off the rails?
Well, the entire afternoon, let's put it this way. When Vince is gone and Vince wasn't there, the inmates really tried to run the asylum. The inmate, or I should say the inmate, Shawn took advantage of the fact that Vince was absent and the fact that Taker wasn't there. It was very unprofessional, uncalled for. And I didn't enjoy conducting an interview with a kid that I've seen start his career, who I did and still do have great respect for. But he challenged that respect by coming out there with his, his sock routine. And I think it seemed to me like he was wearing like these biker shorts, or I don't know what you exactly call them. I think they're biker shorts, or they look like football pants, short, cut off type thing.
Like boxer briefs, kind of.
Yeah. So, yeah, there you go. And so then he stuffed them, and very obnoxiously, very obviously. So it wasn't fun. It didn't help the business any. It was for Shawn to entertain some of his buddies, show the other guys that I'm not a stooge. I don't play well with others. I'm so goddamn good at what I do. They're not going to do anything to me anyway, type deal. This was as Shawn was. He wasn't burnt out yet, but the edges were somewhat charred, and he was having some issues there, just day to day. It seemed to me like so. It was not good, man. I don't know. Vince is pissed off, and I think Vince is pissed off more because Shawn knew better. Shawn does still. WWE's using him wonderfully in NXT about doing his, coaching. And a lot of those kids say, Shawn's their guy. He's their mentor. And so he always had great knowledge and instincts and aptitude for pro wrestling. But on that night, he just went completely in business for himself, was very selfish, very unprofessional, and it was very uncalled for. So, that was not a good night at the office, no doubt.
All right, here's the deal. As kids, man, we all woke up on Saturday morning and fired up some cartoons or some wrestling. I know I was watching wrestling, but I also did it with a big bowl of cereal. But as an adult, I realized I probably shouldn't be eating all that sugar. And most cereals don't give us the protein we need first thing in the morning. But then my wife found Magic Spoon. It's a nostalgically delicious cereal that tastes just like my childhood favorites, but without the sugar and with a ton of protein. And if you're already a Magic Spoon fan, boy, I've got some big news for you. Magic Spoon turned their super popular cereal into high protein treats that are light, crispy, and taste just like those classic crunchy cereal bars. Magic Spoon's brand new treats are so delicious, they've become my go-to midnight snack. My wife even uses it as a pre-workout. Every serving of Magic Spoon has 13 grams of protein, 0 grams of sugar, and 4 grams of net carbs, so you can feel good about what you're eating. The most popular flavors are fruity and cocoa, but there's so many more. And the new treats, they're brand new, and they're crispy, they're crunchy, they're airy, and it's an easy way to get 12 grams of protein on the go. And for the first time ever, Magic Spoon treats are available in grocery stores with delicious flavors like marshmallow and chocolatey peanut butter. And yes, those marshmallow ones taste exactly like you hoped, just like Mom used to make. Get $5 off your next order at magicspoon.com/JR, or look for Magic Spoon on Amazon or in your nearest grocery store. That's magicspoon.com/JR to get $5 off. Magic Spoon. Hold on to the dream.
So I don't know why that's so fascinating to me, but it is. Somewhere along here too, you guys allow some of your talent to appear on Terry Funk's WrestleFest, which is Terry Funk's retirement. In Amarillo on September 11th. This yields some interesting matches too. Mankind versus Sabu. So you've got a WWF performer against an ECW performer. And of course, in the main event, Bret Hart and Terry Funk. I don't know that we'll ever talk about Terry Funk's WrestleFest. What do you remember about this show?
That we were very happy to cooperate. Terry was a lifer in the business, as he still is. God bless him. And one of my all-time favorites, without a doubt, whether he be a heel or babyface or tag guy or broadcasting or whatever, I've been around him in all those incarnations. He's a treasure, quite frankly. So he was, and look, did anybody buy into this is going to be Terry's one and only retirement match? Not really. Come on. But he was home, family, friends, home base of the old territory that his dad ran. So why not help him out? What's it going to hurt us? We were running Amarillo. It wasn't a weekly town for us, for God's sake. So it's just helping somebody. So, and then Mick really wanted to work the show, and Bret really wanted to work the show and pay back old favors and out of respect one of their heroes. So I'm the last guy that's going to say, no, you can't. I got to approve by Vince. And, the only thing we worried about is the same as you worry about every night. You just hope nobody gets hurt. So it'd make us all look bad if somebody got hurt on somebody else's piece of ground. So, but it was a simple yes, and I think it drew well and made Terry happy, and so it was the right thing to do. And guys like Foley and Bret stepping up just showed you their integrity and their character and respect for the overall business, but specifically for Terry Funk.
Let's talk about In Your House, or I'm sorry, One Night Only, rather. It was a UK only pay-per-view, September 20th. The undercard is what it is. There's lots of interesting stuff on here, though, like Tiger Ali Singh and Leif Cassidy. But the main event is what I really want to talk about. The British Bulldog comes in as the European champion, and it's been built locally and promoted locally that Bulldog is dedicating this match to his sister, who is in a bad place with cancer. And
she was sitting at ringside, by the way.
And at the end of the night, Shawn Michaels gets his hand raised and trash comes raining in. A lot of people speculating how in the world this happened, including the theory that Shawn Michaels just goes to Vince and talks him into letting him go over and win the title, promising to drop it back to the Bulldog. And of course, that rematch never happens. What do you remember about this One Night Only show? And I don't know, the whole dynamic of the sister with cancer makes you feel like it's a slam dunk win for the good guy and our hero. And it doesn't go that way.
I just remember that there were a lot of, seemed like endless closed door meetings with Vince and whomever, pardon me, on that day. And there's only one great thing about the WWE over the years. And one of the great things that I discovered when I got there, especially coming off a WCW run that I had, that had a booking committee with a lot of cooks in the kitchen. There's one cook in the kitchen in WWE, Vince McMahon. And so Shawn knew, as everybody else knew, if you want something major changed, it's got to go through the Big Irishman. And so there were several caucuses that day because Vince, first of all, had to be convinced it was the right thing to do because the table was set perfectly for the babyface to go over in his home country with his family and his dying sister at ringside. It was a classic story. And but the other side of that issue, if a heel, i.e. Shawn Michaels, were to go over the local hero, the heel's going to leave there with a great deal of heat. That angst and that anger, that venom is going to translate to television so that when Shawn got back stateside, he brought that heat with him because he loved being that cocky, arrogant, overbearing heel. And he played that role very, very well and very organically. So I just remember a lot of meetings. The thing about commentary for me was that I said this before, it's not important for me to know the finish. If I don't know the finish, I'm fine because I look at it like I'm calling a ball game. And if you're calling a football game, Conrad, as you well know, we don't know who's going to win.
Right.
You call what you see. You add a narrative based on what you see and feel on your monitor. And so that's kind of how we looked at it. So it didn't affect me as a broadcaster, but I know that it affected some of the other guys who were not on Shawn's Christmas card list, or Shawn wasn't on their Christmas card list, were not happy. And what the hell happened? They thought Bulldog, because a lot of the boys had empathy for Bulldog and his situation. Even though Davey had his enemies too, because all the ribs and the first one thing and another that some guys took personally. So it was a very unique, emotional day in that regard. And you're right, though, that the match ended with amazing heat. So maybe Shawn's politicking to get it changed was the right thing to do after all. But I never understood why Bulldog did not get a rematch because to me it seemed like a no-brainer to book it, a rematch based on what happened in England.
So 2 days after this show is where the whole Bret Hart, Vince McMahon meeting happens at Madison Square Garden, $258,000 gate there, 10,672 fans, another 97,000 in merch. But Bret's told, hey, can't afford your contract. Well, there are lots of backstage and private office meetings and discussions about what do we do with Bret. And then you guys just landed on, we can't afford to keep him. When do you remember hearing that Vince is going to meet with Bret and have this conversation?
Well, I knew Vince was going to meet with Bret before he left Stanford. We discussed it, and it was one of those deals where he felt, and he was right, he being Vince, it was his call. This is his meeting. It didn't need me. This is his meeting between he and Bret. And when you tell a guy you're going to sign him to a 20-year contract, which essentially guarantees their future financially and for Bret and his family, and then to say, okay, I can't do that now. Mathematically, it just won't work out. We're having cash flow problems, and we were. So that was kind of the scenario there, Conrad. It was a matter of just doing the math, and it didn't work. So you say, well, why did he offer to him in the first place? Because in the first place, Vince felt like we could afford it, that things are going to change. The cash flow is going to be relieved a little bit. It didn't happen right away. So, but I don't think most of the boys had any awareness of the exact terms of Bret's deal, nor did they know that it wasn't an agenda posted on the board like you'd have your card. It didn't say Vince Bret meeting, nothing. So it kind of was off the radar there a little bit. And, Vince told some people, inner circle people, I'm sure Bruce and Pat and myself, and we all knew how that was going down, and didn't know how he was going to handle it, because it really is tough, because it didn't seem like he'd offered that contract, a 20-year deal, that much, that far in advance. I mean, it was just right. Seemingly, it was just right a few days later after the offer was made, or the promise was made, or what the hell you want to call it, that we have this rescinding of the offer. So, but it wasn't a public thing. It got to become public after a few days later, and people started talking more about those things. And of course, Meltzer finds out. Meltzer's, Meltzer had a great rapport with a lot of people there, and but I know he also had he conversed with Bret from time to time. So I'm sure he got the exact details of it there. So it just wasn't a public knowledge, so to speak, Conrad, but it was a touchy thing, that it was a unique area. Here's the thing I'm trying to say, is the fact that I had not experienced anything quite like that. A 20-year contract in pro wrestling is essentially ill-advised and not popular. It's not normal. 20 years in it's physical business. It's not. It makes little sense to me, but nonetheless, that's where we were. So it was a tough time for everybody, because the common thread comes back. We don't have the capital. We don't have the money. And that affected a lot of us. I know it affected me. I think I got my pay cut like $50,000. So it affected a lot of us in the wrestling side of the business. And Vince's only promise to me was, if you stay with me, I'll give you a release today. You can leave today. Or if you stay with me, I'll make it worth your while over the long haul. I chose the latter. He kept his word, and for me, it all worked out fine. But it was a lot of edgy, hurt feelings, quite frankly, that I didn't know how to navigate some of those things first time. You had to just kind of play it out and listen and pay attention and give a shit.
We should mention that on screen at this MSG show, there's a lot going on too. I think we've talked about it before. Owen Hart has a restraining order against Steve Austin. So when Steve jumps through the crowd and attacks Owen Hart, of course, he is surrounded by the police and swarmed. And Vince McMahon gets up from the announce desk and makes his way over, saying he's going to talk some sense into Steve. And he does his best to explain that the World Wrestling Federation doesn't want to see him injure himself, and these fans don't want to see him get injured. And right now, he's got to listen to the doctors, and he's got to work within the system. And that, of course, leads to the Stone Cold Stunner. Maybe one of the worst ever, but certainly the most important one up to this point. The visual of Steve sort of talking smack to Vince McMahon as he's convalescing on the ground. And then, of course, he's arrested. And this is before people were arrested on Monday Night Wrestling every week. Big moment. When do you remember this becoming the idea, and what'd you think of it? Because this is the first time you're really acknowledging Vince as the owner, and it's the first time Vince has done something physically like this, and you've saved it for a Madison Square Garden show. It's a big crowd.
Big deal. Well, I encourage it. We're going that direction. We're headed that way to where the anti-establishment Stone Cold Steve Austin was going to be a prominent player based, hopefully with his health not being a detriment over the long haul. I liked it. I liked the idea because, I liked it because of the stunner, the surprising nature of it, and the fact what Steve did to Vince was so out of the blue. As I talk about Randy Orton sometimes, out of nowhere. I appreciate those guys for using a lot of my commentary on WWE. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys. But I thought that it was great for the Austin character. Little did I know how it would affect the McMahon character, because I thought Vince he might just come back and go back to his announce position, and like the rest of us who got stunned, you just kind of move on. But his idea was in his head of being a villain, and make no mistake about it, folks. All the great heels we had in WWE during that era, we had no heel better, no heel hotter, no heel more significant than Vince McMahon. Mr. McMahon was in that era. He was the top heel because he matched up perfectly with the top babyface. And so I didn't know the end game, Conrad. I knew on the beginning it's going to be a great move for Austin, but little did I know it also became a great move for Mr. McMahon.
Without question, it's going to change the entire company. And you see one of your other your signees sort of bloom here on this show. Cactus Jack makes his WWF debut. Of course, at this point, we're already very familiar with Mankind. We've started to learn a little bit about Dude Love, but the guy that you really wanted to sign, the character you really wanted to sign, Cactus Jack, makes his debut here. How hard of a sell was this to Vince to finally acquiesce to letting this Cactus Jack character on TV? Because clearly he wasn't in love with it.
No, not in the beginning it wasn't, but Vince fell in love with Mick and his work ethic through the Mankind business. I think that the interview that I did with Mick, that was really, Mick's story. I just kind of navigated it, was a big deciding factor in Vince starting to believe in Mick Foley. Because again, that was not a interview that was scripted. We didn't have lines. We had a general direction, but that's it. So, Mick was just such a pleasant guy to work with. And he got the blessing of the Undertaker, which goes a long way with anybody in that company. Still does. So it was a cool thing, and the fact that Mick had already pulled off a new character in Mankind, the fact that Dude Love was such an entertaining, we thought would be a one-off. It's more than that. But the original of the whole deal was Cactus Jack. So and Cactus Jack was the guy that Vince didn't want to hire because, but he let me hire him, as I mentioned before, because I needed to understand and feel how it was to get your heart broken by a talent you had so much confidence in. So it wasn't a hard sell at all, because here's what it did. It gave the company another T-shirt to sell. It gave the company potentially 3 different talents, in essence, to utilize, all in a top main event level role. Because all those characters that Mick portrayed were main event level guys. So it wasn't a hard sell at all, quite frankly. It might have been if we had not had the Dude Love incarnation and the fact that the new character named Mankind didn't become so successful.
Big moment in wrestling history here for sure. Seeing this show happen at Madison Square Garden. Somebody who's not a part of this though is Yokozuna. The Observer would report that you guys were having Yoko move to Stamford. He's trying to get his weight under control, and he's going to move to Stamford. He's under contract. Bruce says he doesn't remember Yoko ever moving to Stamford. What was the status of Yoko here in late 97. It's been about a year since we've seen him. I think his last on camera was Survivor Series 96.
Well, Yoko's ongoing weight issues was the culprit here. It wasn't anything else. He wasn't a druggie. He had no other substance issues that I'm aware of to this very day. It's just the fact that Yoko was becoming morbidly obese. And unfortunately, in that era where state athletic commissions were still governing pro wrestling for some odd reason, it's like they don't govern Broadway or a musical. Same deal, same presentation, showbiz. But at that time, they were. And if you were found to be guilty or found to be defective in one commission, then most of the other commissions followed suit. So therefore, if we were going to have trouble getting Yoko licensed so he could wrestle in these towns, we needed to fix that because he was such a viable guy, and we'd spent so much time and effort in helping him get over. He was Yoko was a phenomenon, a guy that was that big that had his timing. And if you go back and look at his matches, it shows you that if you execute a few things really, really well, then you can get over without having to have a large offensive repertoire, because Yoko knew how to work and he understood crowd psychology. But it was this whole thing about Yoko was simply about the weight. We were getting ready to lose a star, a main event level star that was very unique, that we could take the time and he didn't have to work every night. We could book him a little bit less because of his travel issues, because of his size. But it was all about the weight. And I don't think Yoko ever moved to Stanford. I think the deal there was he'd just be, if he did, we'd get him to move, which we didn't try. I don't even remember trying. That it would be because Vince could keep an eye on him, and Vince kind of being the godfather, so close to all those cats, the Samoan group over the years and so forth, Alpha, Sika, and so forth, that it was, the right thing to do. But it just wasn't, and he didn't move. And unfortunately, it's like somebody said one time about William the Refrigerator Perry. He ate himself out of the NFL, and Yoko, God bless his soul, pretty much ate himself out of the WWE. And that was the issue all along, was controlling his diet. And, we offered to have surgery, the lap band thing that we did with Paul Bearer, all kinds of solutions we thought, but he just didn't want to go there. He thought he could lose the weight on his own. Unfortunately, like many of us, he didn't have the discipline or the knowledge of what to eat, when to eat. I went to a party one time in Nashville. Taker was living there, and Yoko was there, and they were deep frying turkey tails. And seriously. And so when the turkey tails would float to the top of the hot grease, they were ready to be served, ready to eat. And Yoko was eating those big old fatty turkey tails like they were, some sort of little appetizer. But before he ate them, he would make sure he dipped them in mayonnaise.
Oh.
So you got deep fried turkey tails and mayo, and he was eating them some bitches like they were, mini donuts or something. He's just popping them in. But that he had no discipline as far as what he ate. And again, I can identify a lot of us have that situation. Sometimes I think sometimes he just didn't know what was killing him. He knew he was eating, but he's eating the wrong things. And the thing about a lot of those guys, I found this out with Vader and with Yoko, for example, they worry about being hungry. And so therefore it affects their diet. And they think they got to eat a lot of bad shit to stay full, and you don't. But I it was just a sad thing, because Yoko is a Hall of Fame guy, was a great champion. He was an attraction. Didn't need to see him every week on television, but he was absolutely phenomenal. He's the best time. He has the best timing of any super heavyweight that I ever saw. Bottom line.
Let's talk about what we're doing here behind the scenes internationally. You guys are going to run a show on September 28th and there's going to be some FMW talent there. There's going to be some All Japan Pro Wrestling talent there. And of course, Ken Shamrock and Vader. There's like I think it's billed as an Ultimate Fight Rules cage match. This is, a work shoot. What do you remember about sending talent over here? This is a huge show. It's the Kawasaki Baseball Stadium. The crowd was announced as being 50,000 fans. The real number's 40,000 fans, whatever. Huge crowd for 1997. And oddly enough, Shamrock and Vader are in a UFC style cage.
Yeah. And it worked, and it was a work. It wasn't a shoot. Hey, look, Leon, God bless him, the late Leon White, AKA Big Van Vader, was a tough dude, no doubt about it. But to put him in a environment that it was really Shamrock's world would not have been fair, would not have been a good match, would not have lasted long. It would not have been what the fans expected to see. So it was a controlled environment, but the guys they knew the terms of the situation, that they had to work stiff, snug, if you will, and they did. So, for us, we had two of our guys working with each other. So there's a little bit more managerial control there on what you're doing and what you can't do, what we don't want you to do. So they're working with each other. And the other thing about that deal, Conrad, is you're always looking out for your talent. They could pick up another significant payday. And I'm not going to be the guy that says, well, you can't go because we just don't want you to. We don't have a good reason. And so therefore you're not going to make this nice payday you've been promised. That's just not the way you manage talent. And it's a little bit different ball game. In today's world, probably not that, they might not be that generous, but to then it was a good payday and an interesting matchup. Because here's the thing. You always are willing to let some other promoter at times try these things, because if that had worked out as well as we hoped, that might have been something we went with on a pay-per-view or something somewhere down the road with Vader and Kenny. But it was a unique attraction strictly for the payday. It wasn't a PR mission to help all these other companies. I don't believe. I think it was the fact that we had the chance to generate a great payoff for our talents, which would help them.
What do you remember about around this time Shamrock taking a power bomb from Vader and maybe suffering a lung injury? He started coughing up blood. Bruce Pritchard would run out very concerned at ringside, and they go right to the finish. It's a referee stoppage. Vader screaming for a doctor. Is this all just theater, or is there a real injury underneath?
No, I think he was messed up. Had a little perforation there in his lung or something. Anytime somebody starts spitting up blood, it's not it's serious, obviously. So, it's just Leon was ungodly strong. He was 6'5". So when he got you up in the power bomb, you're dropping from a significant weight, or height rather, I'm sorry. And also with all that power, he's 400 pounds. So working snug and physical was the way Leon did it. And that was all born in Japan, over those years. So, and Shamrock never bitched or moaned about being hurt. He's tougher than a $2 steak without question. But it was just the way those two guys worked. They wanted to make sure that nobody sitting at ringside would roll their eyes because the things they were doing would not break an egg. That was not the case with Ken Shamrock or Big Van Vader. They broke a lot of eggs.
Let's talk about something else that was broken. Owen starts to wear a shirt that says Owen 316, says, "I just broke your neck." Was there any heat with Austin and Owen about the shirt? I know that their relationship was not quite the same post injury. I got to think that what little I know of Steve, he may not have been thrilled with the idea of Owen selling a shirt like this.
He wasn't overwhelmed with it, I don't believe. But he got past it, obviously. It reminded me of the old t-shirt, "I broke Wahoo's leg."
Right.
Just to play off that, what's old can be new again if you present it correctly and give it enough time to be dormant before it's ignited, reinitiated. Steve's relationship with Owen was severely hampered, obviously, after that SummerSlam where Steve got hurt with the pile driver. And it was something that he had talked to Owen about before the match, but Steve went along with it, even though he didn't fully understand why they were doing Owen's applying the whole that particular way. I've heard different stories. Owen talked to me a lot about Steve because he knew I'd be in touch with him a lot. He always asked, and I asked Owen on more than one occasion, well, when did you talk to him last? Well, I haven't. And well, why not? He said, I'm embarrassed. I'm ashamed I did this. It was an accident, and I feel badly about it. So that's what you ought to tell him. You got to make a story up. Just go tell him the truth. I don't think that I don't know that conversation ever took place. Maybe it did in private. I don't know. But Owen always asked about Steve, but he'd ask me about him, and then I would encourage him to call, but he just didn't do it. I said, even if you leave a message, and he hears your voice that you're apologizing, that'll help. That'll help without question. But Owen had that great pride. The Harts are so fundamentally sound. Bret tells a story, and I believe him, that in all the years he worked all around the world, he never hurt anybody. That's an amazing accomplishment, considering what these guys do for a living. So, and Owen had that same heart, being the youngest one of the family. He had that same pride. And so here's the Hart messing up a move that we're not sure yet, that may have either ended or certainly significantly shortened Stone Cold's career.
Let's talk a little bit about what TV looks like as we head in here. The September 29th Monday night, which is our go home edition for this pay-per-view, Raw does a 2.7, Nitro does a 4. And that was sort of the tale for all of September. On the 8th, it was 2.2 to 4.3. A week later, it was 2.6 to 3.9. A week later, it was 2.4 to 3.7. And you would think here on the go home edition, maybe this is going to be more watched than it is. It's up from a 2.4 to a 2.7, but Nitro is also up from a 3.7 to a 4. Nitro just firmly in the lead, man. What's that, are you feeling, hey, we're selling out big shows, we got good houses, but the ratings aren't there? Are you really focused on what you're doing? You're still frustrated at this point? What's the tone or tenor of the office at the time?
Go compete, and don't allow the talents to dwell on the fact that we got our ass beat 83 weeks in a row. Just don't do it. We can't affect what they're doing. We can't change what they're doing. We can only focus on what we're doing. It's not unlike whatsoever, at least in my opinion, what we're facing now on Wednesday nights, where WWE moved NXT to be head to head against us or whatever it is, and that wasn't an accident. That was to make sure that they could retard our growth, and they could certainly say on their straight face, "No, we did it for our own product. We only did it because, well, if that was such a great idea, then why hadn't you done it before? Why did it come up 2 weeks before we debut?" It's to confuse the marketplace. It's to divert the attention off a new brand that's just trying to present pro wrestling. That's all. Same deal on that. So we just kept telling guys to focus on what we do, focus on what the hell we're doing, and it'll take care of itself. Because, like in my situation, for just as an example, I would get the ratings. We get the ratings on Tuesdays for Monday Night Raw. And you'd get the ratings, you'd evaluate the minute by minutes, you see who's over, who's drawing, who wasn't, peaks, valleys in the show, all your little analysis that one could do. But at the end of the day, we got to go do another show in 6 days from now. So it's like, there's maybe a Lawler saying, one can't grieve forever. I think it's an old W.C. Fields line. One can't grieve forever. And we couldn't grieve forever because we got to get to business. We had house shows to run the weekend. We had another TV to do in 6 days, and sometimes a pay-per-view in 5 days. No time to boo-hoo, and no time to focus on anything but what we can control. And that's how I preach to the guys all the time. I always talk about ratings to them. I give them the honest truth, the truth, period. And then I would change the subject to something that was positive. You can't piss on the fact that we're selling a lot of tickets at some of these live events, are doing great business. So something's working, or they wouldn't be leaving their home and getting their card and dragging their kids to the arena to watch wrestling. Something's working. It's just the fact that our television audience has not found us in that regard yet on Monday nights. They forgot about us. We needed to get some new things going. We need to get some new talent over, and that's what we did. And at the end of the day, they went belly up, and the WWE is still kicking ass bigger and stronger than they ever have.
Let's talk a little bit about the actual show. We're finally here, but before we get to the actual pay-per-view, well, there's some bad news. On the free-for-all, unfortunately, this is where we learned that Brian Pillman has passed away. He wrestled the night before in St. Paul, and from what we know, passed away in that hotel room after the show. So late that night, early the morning of this show, when did you find out that Pillman was gone?
Late that night, I think one of the agents called me. It might have been Jack Lanza. It was shocking, especially with such a weekend that we had planned there in St. Louis, with all the former NWA champions coming back, and the first ever Hell in a Cell match that nobody knew exactly how it was going to be processed, how it was going to be produced in a new structure. The roof on it, the exercise, all that stuff. So it became it monopolized our thoughts, at least certainly mine, because I was instrumental in bringing Brian to WCW and to WWE. I considered him a friend. He was an ornery little bastard, but boy, he was talented, and I loved him. I still miss him. A great mind for the business, but that kind of overtook. It affected the sizzle of the weekend, because for a lot of us old school guys, going back to St. Louis with a major show is a big deal. It's like going to the Garden. St. Louis was the New York City of the Midwest as far as wrestling was concerned, and so it was a big deal there. So I heard about it in the middle of the night. I was already in St. Louis, and it was sad, man. It was just shockingly sad, and I still think about what could I have done along the way to help Brian. And, I had him drug tested randomly. We did all kinds of things in that respect to try to curve the tide there. But, he was, he just had these issues, and God bless him. He never got to live his dream. And I think that Humvee accident where he got his ankle fused was one of the major nails in the coffin, because he couldn't be as athletic with a fused ankle as he was prior to that, obviously. And that that hurt him, because his athleticism, meaning Brian's, was one of his calling cards. In addition to his facial expressions, his attitude, his promos, but his amazing athleticism was incredible.
It's a shame that Brian was no longer with us. I'm sure we'll do a long form Brian Pillman show another time, but I am curious about, how you proceed with this. You know what the card is. You've probably already had your production meeting for the pay-per-view. Mm-hmm. You know where that's going, but you've also got to let some family know that they've lost their husband or their father or their son or their brother or their sister. What's protocol when you get a call like this in the middle of the night?
I'm not sure. Normally it was Vince. Vince liked to make Vince felt obligated to make those calls. He's the head coach. He's the owner. So Vince wanted to have that responsibility. Felt like he owed it to the families and the talents. And I agreed. I wholeheartedly agreed. But, we followed through. We talked about that. Vince talked to Brian's wife, and Brian's son, little Brian, was just a twinkle in the eye at that point. Now he's wrestling. Good kid too. Good kid. I'm pulling for him. But we did that, and then of course later on, Vince and I went to the memorial service in Cincinnati. We flew in and then went to the funeral service, or the memorial service. And it was one of the hardest things I've done, because the casket was open, And it was just heartbreaking to see Brian there in that casket, dead, and really unnecessarily dead. Didn't have to die then, but personal mistakes and personal decisions can tear up a lot of families, man. We see it happen every day, and that was one of the situations there with Brian. But going to Cincinnati to the funeral was very memorable, and I'm glad that Vince and I both went. I was going to go anyway, but then Vince obviously wanted to go as well, so we went together on that deal. And things like that are what galvanized Vince and myself, even to this very day, where we enjoy shooting the shit with each other and talking from time to time. Things like that galvanized us. It gave us a chance to talk about things that were not a headlock, or can we get this guy over, or what kind of return? What are you going to book an LAJR type deal? It was life, and that really, I still think about those type of situations with Vince, and that helped us establish a relationship that worked out very well for many, many years.
Yeah, it's a sad story. I'm sure we'll tell the full Brian Pillman story another time. Let's try to talk about the pay-per-view. It's going to be a lot to unpack here. Kama Mustafa and D'Lo Brown and Rocky Maivia are going to beat the Legion of Doom in 12 minutes and 20 seconds. This is a 3-on-2 handicap match. I guess Ken Shamrock was supposed to be on the LOD side, but he's still out with the lung injury, so he's no longer able to go. And Vince actually referred to Rocky Maivia as Rocky Johnson once during the match, which is kind of fun. You saw this match for the first time in a long time. What did you think?
Not bad at all. Again, a lot of new. The heels, Kama, Godfather, and D'Lo, and of course the great one, The Rock. They're just evolving. They're just getting to the big dance. LOD had the challenge for LOD was to try to keep them fresh, and not overexpose them, because they were not every day. They were not like the Midnight Express or Rock and Roll Express or even the Young Bucks, where you could see them on a regular basis and be okay. They were an attraction tag team that was best utilized if they weren't seen every single week. It kept them fresh because their game was was very consistent. They always did some of the same things every match. And so overexposing that's not a good thing for them. But the team of the LOD and Ken Shamrock against those big dudes was I thought a nice booking, quite frankly. And we also showed, Rock beat Hawk with his little Uranagi. I think he changed the rock bottom. And so I think, but anyway, good outing. And the one thing that came out of that whole deal, kept discovering and rediscovering The Rock.
Right.
And that was where the money was.
Tell me about D'Lo. We haven't spent a ton of time talking about D'Lo. What do you think the upside was for D'Lo at this point?
Well, D'Lo was a former football player at the University of Maine. He was a Maine Black Bear, no lineman. I think he was a D lineman. So he had athleticism. He's a tough guy. And D'Lo was a college educated, articulate, and was a good member of the locker room. I always liked D'Lo. I gave him that stupid idea, or I pitched it, and some other people, Vince liked it, and others did. I'm not so sure I liked it myself after a while, but where he wore the chest protector to protect
cool. Of course, I like that.
To protect an old injury, because he used that frog splash as his finish, and me thinking, well, it's like having the old loaded boot, or slipping a foreign object into your mask or something. It gave D'Lo an unfair advantage in the sense that nobody else is wearing a chest protector delivering frog splashes. Unfair. Well, he had a doctor's permit. He had a doctor's orders to wear this to protect his lingering injury. So it was, I like D'Lo. D'Lo brought, he was stable. You knew D'Lo was going to go so high. He wasn't going to headline WrestleMania, but he was like I always say, use a baseball analogy. Your guys are hitting the 5, 6, 7, 8 holes. They got to be able to put the ball in play. And D'Lo could put the ball in play, even though we knew he would never be the guy. He was a good complementary piece in a faction. The faction of the Nation of Domination soon became about developing and spinning off Dwayne Johnson. And so the other guys would make good support material for that evolution. So D'Lo did a good job. I'm glad that we had him on our team, and he contributed well. He was reliable. My biggest trait, he was reliable and he's smart. As I said, a college educated guy. He played played college football at Maine. So he functioned in a group. And so I just thought that D'Lo was kind of underrated at times, because if he had not come along at the same time as Rock, people would have noticed him more for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the thing I was getting at is I think, obviously no one could ever compare to the success of The Rock, but in a weird way, it may have actually hurt D'Lo, because he comes in and it's just sort of in the background and slowly but surely carves out a niche in a spot where that's not easy to do when you've got, former world champ Ron Simmons, and you've got somebody like The Rock, and you've got to figure out how to get over. He managed to do it. So, D'Lo has a place in wrestling, man. Let's talk about, the next match. This is thrown together, it feels like, at the very last minute. It's a mini match. Max Benny and Nova taking on Tarantula and Mosaic. I'm all about having, Sonny introduce teams and matches. And I get why we're going to have her involvement on the show, but the minis, who's pushing for the minis here on Bad Blood?
I don't know for sure. It seems to me like the minis were obviously an extension of the entertainment aspect of sports entertainment. They had gotten on a nice roll in Mexico. They're very, very talented guys, but they're an entertainment act. It's hard, that I don't want to be disrespectful, but it's hard to take it, much like it was with women years ago. Sometimes it was hard to take them as serious competitors because of their gender and how they presented themselves in that ring. Same thing for the minis. They've always been known more as a comedy act than not. And I think, Conrad, they may have been put on the card as a replacement match because of the Brian Pillman death. I'm not real sure about that, but I don't know that they were booked originally, but if they were, it was to get a 5 or 6 minute match of entertaining spots and have some comedy. And there was comedy in that match, that I think one of the many said Lawler's lap or something, it was just a normal, old territory, midget, small people, vertically challenged, whatever. I apologize for offending anybody, on that deal. So all entertainment, and just to add, as Vince would say, it was a let me up match. All this intensity and the physicality and the guys all trying to get over, pushing the envelope a little bit more, as evidenced by the big time power bomb from Vader to Ken Shamrock type things, those type things. That was Vince's let me up match, and the same spot that the women held a lot of the times before they got really athletic and good and got more recognition and proper positioning. Here in the last 2 or 3 years. So, entertainment, Conrad, a laugh, go get yourself a hot dog or go hit the can or just relax a little bit, chill. But that's why they were there. They were very good. I mean, they were good at what they did. Victor Quinones was a contact for us and, with the Mexican office in Mexico City. So that's how we got them to come in, was through Victor. And they were on a per spot deal. We paid them per appearance. So they didn't have big contracts or long-term contracts, but they did add to the show. They added some diversity to the entertainment package. And again, we're still looking at an ensemble cast here until certain talents start really separate. So until then, they fit well into the ensemble cast concept.
All right. How about a little cheat code? How about a little life hack? That's what my wife calls Lumen. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs, and it even gives you tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, your workouts, your sleep, and even your stress management. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism, whether you're burning mostly fats or carbs. And then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. You can also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals, so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time. And here's why your metabolic health matters. Think of your metabolism as your body's engine. It's how your body turns the food you eat into fuel that keeps you going. And because your metabolism is really at the center of everything your body does, optimal metabolic health translates to a whole host of benefits, like easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness results, better sleep. Lumen gives you recommendations to improve your metabolic health with each breath. And my wife explained this to me as almost like an overwhelming advancement in technology. I can't really describe how excited she was to see this because she didn't even know technology like this existed. My wife in real life is in the medical research field. So whenever you see like a new drug get approved and they do the with all the side effects at the end, well, that's what she does. So she is always fascinated by the advances in technology and medicine. But this also comes at a time where she's working on her fitness journey. You've probably seen me post some of my pictures on the accounts of her in bikini competitions and fitness competitions. I mean, she's really taken her fitness to a whole new level. And as a result, she's learning more about her body than ever before. And there's a lot of stuff out there that we read about that feels sort of one size fits all. And here's an example she told me about that she's found through Lumen. There's a lot of talk about 18-hour fasting right now. But what if your body does its best work at like a 12-hour fast, and after the 12-hour mark, the fasting actually starts to work against you? Your body is like, hey, what's going on? We're not eating anything. We need to do something differently. Well, you wouldn't know that if you didn't have a Lumen. But the technology for this was usually reserved for doctors' offices. That's the picture that my wife painted for me. Think about a guy on a treadmill hooked up to a bunch of wires. He's got a mask on, and you see the doctor with the clipboard there. That's the way this used to be done. And now you've got a handheld device you can keep by your bedside, on your desk, just throw it in your backpack with you. It's with you as you go. You breathe into this dude, this Lumen, and on your app, it tells you exactly what's going on. You don't have to schedule an appointment for next February and get on a treadmill and get hooked up to all these machines. No, it's just with you. Lumen is a real life hack to know exactly what's going on in your body and how to get the most out of it. They're going to give you a daily plan based on your breath for what you should eat that day to have your body working at its peak. This feels like some George Jetson stuff, y'all. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/grillingjr for 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/grillingjr for 15% off your purchase. And thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring today's episode.
Let's talk about what's next on the show, because it is something that sort of sticks out in hindsight. It's an advertisement for an Austin 316 shirt. And in this era, this is not uncommon. Whenever you've got a hot piece of merch, you'd run a commercial for it. They don't exactly do that now anymore. I mean, you see commercials for merch, but they'll show a whole bunch of different shirts and a whole bunch of products, and then just show you the website at the bottom. In this era, you had to call and order. How did you guys decide what shirts to push, when to shoot production for these, the process for ramping up when you knew you had a hot item? What can you tell us about merchandising and the way you would promote it here in 97?
Well, the sale of merch at the live events, including some of the TVs, obviously, but the live events were more plentiful. So you got a good gauge on who's selling what. And at that time, it was not a horse race. Austin was killing it. I remember at one time, one quarter, he got $1 million check for basically selling T-shirts, royalty check. So it wasn't a hard decision. Who's hot? How do we push it? And it was Vince's decision to go with it and to separate Steve's shirts from everybody else's, because they were selling amazingly well. So that wasn't a hard decision to make, but it was kind of unique. And again, his whole situation was, we can't let the audience forget him. He's doing he's doing a stunner here. He's drinking a beer here. He's doing some commentary. He's a timekeeper. He did all kinds of things. But then having that shirt there was, I thought, really smart of Vince on that regard. And it sold like crazy. They sold, the Austin shirts still sell. All these years later, it's amazing how that character and that person has connected with the audience. If talents today could simply watch how Austin related to his audience, he found his audience, he identified them, and he serviced them. He made sure that they were taken care of. And so Austin had matches to what he was a great listener, so he'd find out or hear what the fans were buying, and that's what he would give them. Today's world, guys memorize their spots oftentimes. They go over them endlessly, their match. Endlessly, ad nauseum. Whether it's going to get over or not, come hell or high water, this is what we're going to do because we worked on this all afternoon. And that is total horse shit. It is absolutely no way to structure wrestling is to go out there and do a memorized match, not knowing that it may not be getting over the fans, but this is what you're going to sell them anyway. So Austin was really smart at that. A lot of guys could learn a lot for seeing how he interacts with the crowds. No matter where he was, he found the common denominator, and he found the way to embrace them. And a lot of guys don't pay that much attention.
Let's talk about the Godwins. They're going to be out here next, and they've got a different look. They're now the heel Godwins. They're the bad pig farmers. So they've changed their look to overalls with no shirts. And they're going to be in here with the headbangers. Not a great match, but the Godwins are going to get their hand raised at the end. This will be their second reign as tag champs. I got to tell you, it sort of shocked me the month prior when the headbangers won the tag titles, and Bruce said, hey, that's the reason we did it, because you couldn't call it.
Right.
But here a month later, you're taking it off the headbangers, putting it on the Godwins. The Godwins at this point in October of 97 feel like, I don't know, in their dying days. This is a diminished property from what the Godwins maybe were once before. Where were the Godwins in the pecking order? What was the thinking in changing them to heels? What can you tell us about the Godwins here in late 97?
Well, first of all, the Henry and Phineas were very popular guys in our company because they were loyal. They worked their ass off. They were reliable, big, especially Henry was a big, impressive son of a gun. And Phineas, very entertaining, big frames, all that good stuff. By the way, Phineas is now, Dennis is a chef in Florida, and I heard he's doing very well, by the way. But they had kind of, I guess you would say, they essentially just ran their course. There wasn't a lot more to do. Look, tag team wrestling in that era, much like it is today in all the business, except I would say for AEW, is kind of looked at as a back burner deal. It's a support mechanism. And, but when you got the best tag team in the world in the Young Bucks, by many people's estimation, then you got to have a tag team feel or presentation. And we do that in AEW with a big tag team tournament coming up soon. But I think we run a course with those two dudes, as baby faces. There's only so much picking and grinning you can do before it's time to change jerseys and get on the other side of the fence. And they're big, rugged guys. They both could take good bumps. They both could feed a comeback, all essential things for a heel to be able to do. And they had good teamwork. They were believable, two big bastards. So they did well. And then, of course, we added their uncle Cletus to the group. I don't know whose idea that was. Not a bad idea, actually, because Tony Anthony, who played the role of Uncle Cletus, was probably one of the better hands we had in the whole roster. He drew money. He's a good hand from Knoxville, Smoky Mountain area, dirty white boy, good hand. So it was just time to move them and to make them heels. And I thought they filled that role pretty good in a tepid division, in a very mundane, under-promoted tag team scene. On their level of tag teams, they were not given too many breaks in that regard. But it just on the upper level, if you got a Bulldog and an Owen or something like that, yeah, there was some tag team action there, but not on the Godwin level. It didn't run that deep as far as the promotion of the tag. So it was time, Conrad. It was, and they knew it was time, and but they're such good guys. They made it work as best they could, considering it was a kind of a cold entity. To put the tag titles on the Headbangers, who, they, like Bruce said, it was a surprise. Nobody saw it coming, and it kind of made common sense. But they weren't in a real fertile ground. But I always had a lot of respect for the Godwins. So they were, for me, at the head of talent relations, you want those guys that are reliable and that will come to work, ready to work. And those two cats were always there, ready to roll up their sleeves and get their jobs done.
Well, next up, we see a video package that Vince is going to call the month of Steve Austin. We're sort of recapping what he's been doing, and we're making sure that he's front and center. I mentioned earlier that Sonny was a ring announcer for one of these matches. That's another thing that's always sort of been curious to me. She's been your most downloaded celebrity on AOL. Clearly she's got something that fans want to see, but she's not figured in here storyline wise. She's just doing some backstage skits with Doc Hendricks and doing some ring announcing. Were you guys trying to figure out what to do with the ladies in this era? Cause it doesn't feel like very many of them have a defined role.
Yeah. Trying to figure it out, especially her, referring to Sonny because she was such a downloaded entity. And at that time, being the most downloaded person on AOL was a big deal. I'm sure it'd probably still be a big deal. So yeah, and the way she looked and a unique presentation, she certainly wasn't Moolah. She was a star female that didn't look like any of the other star females that preceded her. And so yeah, you try to find something for her to do. And Tammy probably had a little bit too much knowledge of the business because she was very she could be very discerning with her or creativity. She I'm not so sure that she would have been really good on the booking committee. She's very smart. But yeah, trying to find something for her to do was there. But go back and look at we talked about Austin. They came to see Austin stun somebody and drink beer and hopefully say something on the mic. Sonny, much the same way in the sense that they came to see her body and her cleavage and her butt and all the other sexy things that you get from that deal. So, and she really started the glamour run of these women and on WWE television. And so she had a big role in that deal. So seeing how she was promoted and how she got over was another historical thing, another element on this Bad Blood show that was very meaningful. One of the many things that was very meaningful. So we knew that if we got could find women with the aptitude and had sex appeal and some athleticism, obviously, that they could be in those Sonny Sable type roles, which is totally unlike what you're seeing now with Charlotte and some of these cats. So on WWE or Dr. Britt Baker in AEW or whatever the case may be. It's just a different ball game, different entity. But we knew that our male demographic, by and large, enjoyed seeing sexy, powerful women. And Sonny, at that era, on that point in time, represented exactly that. So she was a star that needed more work.
Well, Michael Cole is going to do a promo backstage. He's going to catch up with Owen Hart. And Owen's going to say he's going to win the Intercontinental title, and he's threatening a lawsuit if Austin gets involved in his match later. The next segment is something I don't think I'd ever seen on a WWF pay-per-view before. It's the introduction of Gene Kiniski, Jack Briscoe, Harley Race, Dory Funk, Terry Funk, Luthez, Sam Mushnick, and a little package with photos and newspaper clippings of their entire career. What a tremendous segment, and how interesting is it that you guys are doing this on a WWF show? It doesn't seem like something that Vince would normally go for.
We did it because it helped us sell tickets to St. Louis. A lot of the St. Louis fans are so loyal. They've been coming for years and years. Obviously the event was popular. We did 21,000 or where it was.
Yeah.
People. The adding all those famous St. Louis oriented NWA names, including the promoter Sam Muchnick, was done to create local interest and to ostensibly then help sell more tickets. So that was why we did it. It was the right thing to do. I remember us pitching it to Vince. I think Jerry Briscoe and I were the ringleaders of that little deal. Maybe others. Bruce could have been involved too. He was a big NWA fan as well. So, but primarily, Briscoe was. We signed Briscoe to be kind of the point person because obviously he could talk to all these guys, his brother Jack, and then Harley, all these guys, the Funks, Lou, all of them. They had great relationships. They had great commonality. So that was why we did that. It was to create local interest in the market, and we did get local interest out of the market as well. It created another reason to come to the Keel and join those 21,000 people. In addition to the card we're going to have, in the first ever Hell in a Cell match, you got to see some of your favorites return to the scene of some of their greatest triumphs and tragedies.
Cornette was loving this. He's gone on record as saying he couldn't wait to go get all their autographs. So, you know, when you've got a guy like Cornette excited, who's seen and done it all, you've done something pretty cool. Did you line up the appearance of all these legends? Were you the guy making the calls for this?
No, Briscoe did.
Okay.
I signed off on it.
Sure.
And I may have talked to some, but basically we had Jerry do it because Jerry had the time when he wasn't on the road. He wasn't on the road to all the house shows. He did a lot of TVs, obviously. But Jerry just was a better contact for it than, and we created a nice little payday for them. So it was good. And they appreciated it. They enjoyed seeing each other. They enjoyed seeing the boys that were on our roster at that time. The boys enjoyed seeing them. It was a real win-win deal all the way around. I'm so glad that we did that. And then you look back on it now here in 2019, and so many of those guys that we had there as our honored guests are no longer with us. I'm sure glad that we got a chance to do that. And quite honestly, it took a little bit of the sting off Brian Pillman's death too that day, a little bit, because you saw the sparkle in the eyes of some of these older guys, Sam Mushnick looking around and seeing all these amazing stars that he helped develop and put on the map. It was just a good feeling thing. And I think on that day, I think I did the interview in the ring with those guys, introduced them and all that stuff. It was welcome. We needed that happiness. We needed that twinkle in our eye from watching some of our heroes get honored and get those great ovations again. And it was heartwarming, Conrad, really, because a lot of the guys, the wrestlers that we were honoring, some of them were concerned that will these fans remember us? And that was very easy to dissuade their apprehensions, because once they were introduced, you could tell that the fans loved seeing these guys there. And I loved the fact that we were able to bring them all together. And never before, never again, to my knowledge, was that same group of distinguished men from pro wrestling ever together in an official environment like that. So we did some good things that day. And again, we talked about this show, Bad Blood, being dotted with history and things that would be significant going forward. And to me, a part of the wrestling history was enjoyed that day and the Keel with all those former NWA champions.
A lot of glasses in this segment. Do you need new prescription eyeglasses or sunglasses but don't want to break the bank? Well, $39glasses.com is an American company that's owned by two eye doctors right there in Long Island, New York. To get your exact fit, just visit $39glasses.com and use the virtual try-on tool they've created. Take a selfie, and it allows you to see exactly how the frames will look on you before you even purchase them. To make your glasses, they use high-quality materials and name-brand lenses to create your glasses at a fraction of the price.
Health as well, so your vision is key. I just can't promote this enough, the vision aspect of this thing, and getting it done accurately, properly, and affordably. It's a good deal.
Yeah, I was used to paying over $300 for a pair of glasses, and to get a pair for $39, well, I got it a little cheaper because I used the promo code GRILL10. But $39glasses.com, it's a real thing. It's not a gimmick. They're a real disruptor, just like you've heard with razor blades in another industry. This is the new way I'm doing this. I got my wife on it. We love it. $39glasses.com. Use that promo code GRILL10, save another $10. I can't believe that's even possible. I don't know how they're making profit, but Lord bless them. $39glasses.com. Let's talk about, what we're doing next on the show. We've got Michael Hayes in the back, or Doc Hendricks rather, interviewing Faarooq and the Nation about his match with Owen. And then afterwards, Vince McMahon gives an update on Brian Pillman's death. And he says, no foul play is suspected, but there is suspicion of an overdose. And Vince makes sure here to point out that that's a problem in all of sports. In hindsight, maybe this doesn't age well, but Vince, for whatever reason, felt like he needed to get in front of this, worried about his company and all the folks who work there. What'd you make of, the decision to give an update and for Vince to make a statement like that right in the middle of the show?
Well, the update I had no problem with. I didn't think we needed to go as far to talk about all the sports, because it felt like it's a CYA, cover your ass. And I didn't think that was necessary. You know, we didn't do anything to facilitate Brian's death. You know, we were trying to be proactive. At some point, talents have got to look in the mirror, and that's the person that's got to make these final decisions. But I didn't think it hasn't aged well, and I don't think that we needed to do that. But I understand getting ahead of the curve and being proactive. I got all that. I just felt like that could have probably been saved for another day, another environment, another platform. But it was what it was, as they say. And but the concept of giving an update as this new information was being made available to us, I didn't have a problem with that. Just the other part, the one thing about big problem in all the sports. Look, here's the thing. At the end of the day, he's right. It is a big problem in sports then, and it still is. But however, that doesn't mean we should have utilized it at that point in time. So in any event, it was what it was in that regard. And I just felt like in the middle of the show, it may have added a little bit of a damper. We already got past this. We've already discussed this. We already talked about this. People know that Brian passed away hours before in Minneapolis. So I just didn't. It didn't resonate with me, Conrad, whatsoever. Again, if nothing else, blatantly CYA, and again, maybe the other thing is that it just kind of put, oh yeah, Brian passed away. It went back to putting a damper on things. We had to work our way back out of and move forward in a more positive way.
Of course, next up, Owen Hart wins the vacant Intercontinental title from Faarooq, when Steve Austin would hit Faarooq with the title belt. And the idea here, of course, is Steve wants Owen to win the belt, so he gets a shot at Owen at Survivor Series. Meltzer would say Hart looked like he was mentally somewhere else, probably because he was. How affected do you think Brian was with Owen's passing?
Big time. They were buddies. They trained together. They hung together in Calgary when Brian was playing football for the Calgary Stampeders, and the Harts were bricking Brian in to wrestle. Brian and Owen were in the ballpark age-wise, and which means they had the same interests and likes and dislikes and things of that nature. He was obviously very affected by it. He was listless that day because it was hard for him to believe that somebody as viable and as vibrant as Brian, especially the Brian that Owen grew up knowing, was gone. So I think it had an effect on it. Owen Hart could not have a bad match. I don't think it was within his power to go out and have a bad match. But you could tell that he didn't quite have the giddy up and go that he normally would. And that was all, I think, like you mentioned, Conrad, because of Brian Pillman's passing.
Next up, DOA are going to wrestle Los Boricuas for 9 minutes and 11 seconds. Meltzer would say these 8 only had a few minutes lead time to get dressed and put together a match, so they had an excuse. And Vince and yourself are on air acknowledging that you've had to scramble and make some adjustments to the card. What do you remember about throwing this match together at the last minute here?
We basically just looked at our roster and to see who was available. You mark off everybody that's booked, and then who on your sheet of your talent sheet of baby faces and heels is available. And so, we had that little, both the Boricuas and the DOA, good company men. We felt like even on short notice, they were the kind of guys that were raised in a territory and had great experience. They didn't need to sit down and talk about their match all day. Memorize this, you do that, I'll do this. Okay, then nothing. But the match was cold. And I don't know that Vince and I did them any favors by saying, this match is being added to the card due to Brian Pillman's passing. I don't know if that helped their cause either, but it was a non-advertised match that found its way on the pay-per-view. It did not get a great response because it was colder ice, but I admire the guys for doing what they could on such short notice with no story. Essentially no story involved whatsoever, just a tag match. And that kind of bit them in the ass from the fans' perspective. It did not get over, but did we really think it was going to get over? I didn't. I don't think Vince did either. But it's what we needed to do. We needed a match, and those guys, we could depend on them.
Next up, we've got Bret Hart and Davey Boy taking on Vader and the Patriot. They're going to go 23 minutes and 13 seconds. Meltzer would say this was supposed to be a flag match, but for reasons not made clear, the rules were changed just as the match got started. And it was basically just a regular match. The flags were on poles in opposite corners, and the rules were you could win by capturing the flag, but there was no climbing the poles at all during the match, which makes me think the poles weren't secure enough and they changed the rules. It was a walking wounded match because Davey Boy's knee was bothering him. Vader had a broken nose and a hyperextended elbow. Patriot had a viral infection earlier in the week. So lots of injuries to go around here. What do you remember about the rules to this being changed? And, what'd you think of, the concept, a flag match, second from the top in this America versus Canada angle?
Didn't have a problem with the flag match aspect of it. I thought the match would have been better than it was, considering who was in it. But because of what you mentioned, Conrad, about the injuries, illnesses, it just wasn't there for whatever reason. Sometimes things like that just don't click. And you would think because of the level of talent, the great skill sets these guys had, that they can't have a bad match. Well, they proved the fact that just about anybody can have a bad match. And that's one thing you rarely say about a Bret Hart match. If we perceive that match was not at the top level as we all wanted, including the talents, it's one of the few times you can ever say that Bret Hart was involved in a match. It wasn't a stellar match. And this was not a stellar match. It underdelivered for the reasons that we discussed, but it was loaded with star power. It had a lot of box office sizzle. It's just that because of injuries and bumps and bruises and illness, it never got any traction, and so therefore it really never got over.
It's a shame that he's gone so quickly after this. This is really his last major show. He had essentially been in prime spots, for a few months here, and then very quickly he's not long for this world. In an alternate universe, do you think the Patriot could have been a top guy with the company long term?
Long term, not sure. Likely not. But he got better as he went along. Dale Wilkes, hell of an athlete, All-American football player at South Carolina, I believe. Big time college ball player. But Dale has some issues that we were not totally aware of, to be honest with you. Drug issues and that ended up biting him in the ass. But big time athlete. I just think that I don't know how good he could have gotten because we never got to see it. He was evolving as he went along. He was growing. He didn't have a big track record of drawing a lot of money here and there. We hired him because he had a great body, real good athletic talents, nice guy, really a nice guy, very polite, very professional, but he just had that damn monkey on his back of the pills and stuff. And, until somebody makes a mistake, you give them, and they have their physical, and they don't have large quantities of these dangerous drugs in their system. You don't know. So, but Dale was a good guy, good hand. I can always see him hovering in near the top of the card, Conrad, to your question. But I don't know. I didn't see enough of him to know that over the long haul, if he would have been able to hold up to the rigors of what we were doing, because he was beat up too. A lot of those football players come into the league, WWE, for example, with bad shoulders. You know, they're hitting people, dislocations, separations, neck injuries. And so Dale had that baggage with him in addition to the other stuff. But a hell of a good guy. I'm glad we hired him. I don't have any regrets there. I just wish we could have got him on a straight path, and he would have probably been closer to what you projected, a top guy. But I thought at best he would have been a top guy under the right circumstance, but maybe not a top guy as a single. I might be wrong about that too. So, but I don't regret hiring him and bringing him in. He's a top guy in that respect, but just I didn't know if he had the experience or the commitment, and these other distractions that were eating at him was never going to let him be as good as he could be.
How does it come to an end? Do you ask him to leave, or does he ask to leave?
I think it became a pretty consensual thing. He had to get these issues addressed, and we could not continue to do business with him under the current auspices of his health, mental health, dependence on painkillers, things of that nature. It was inevitable. It had to happen. And, sometimes when you do that, you hope that you're saving a guy's life. It's not being mean-spirited, but you can't have a guy that you're not sure, but he may be impaired and have him charged with the obligation of taking care of his opponent's body and their livelihood and their general health. And so that was a trust issue became there. And it wasn't because Dale was a bad guy, it was because Dale's drugs were bad. And he was getting beat up by those and instead of anything else. But I don't remember exactly. I'm sure I told him, we're going to have to move on and without you. But I don't today's auspices, and I'm not so sure that I don't know for sure that he hasn't. Speaking of Dale Wilkes and the Patriot, that he hasn't taken advantage of WWE's program for the alumni on rehabilitations, things of that nature. That was a bigger deal, Conrad, than him getting over. That was a bigger deal than him being a top guy. We finally have a masked guy that was kind of different and a good body and all that good stuff. What this story was about was getting him clean and sober so he could live. And that was much bigger than any of the other stuff. So, and that's what made that job in talent relations so stressful. And, you get emotionally involved in these guys and you meet their families and they all knew that dad had an issue or the husband had an issue. And you gotta work around it. You gotta work through it. And the only solution we had is that it's the same old deal. Jimmy Johnson once said, the old coach of the Dallas Cowboys said, if I can't solve your problem, I don't have one choice. That's to eliminate it. And wrestling is a lot that way. You do everything you can to solve someone's problem, but for whatever reason, that solution is not sticking, or the talent isn't committed to that. You only got one option. They got to go. So if you don't want to help yourself, I can't help you if you don't want to help yourself. And Dale was in that deep on that stuff, and I'm glad that he's, it worked out the way it did. But he was a great guy to be around, and it just shows you how a little white pill can destroy so many facets of one's life, and unnecessarily, quite frankly.
It's crazy to think that that's going to be the end for him. Let's talk about Bret Hart though, because Bret's in the main event in July and has one hell of a match in Calgary at the Stampede show. And he's in the main event the next month in August at SummerSlam, and he becomes the world champion. But now on the two following pay-per-views, September and now October, Undertaker and Shawn Michaels go on last. Bret Hart as your world champion does not. Does Bret take issue with that? I know he was very competitive.
I think anybody would take issue with it if they're the champion and you're on a card you're not going on last. That's much like people were criticizing All Out when Jericho and Hangman Page closed the show to determine the new, at first, AEW champion. And the match and the show closer wasn't the ladder match, the ladder tag match with the Lucha Brothers and the Young Bucks. A lot of people thought because of the way, in hindsight, obviously, that the tag team ladder match was more spectacular than was the match for the title. But if you're going to put your title in a position of respect, meaningful, be more meaningful, et cetera, it needs to close the show. I can promise you that, Bret was always a classy guy. If he had displeasure, he's not the kind of guy that goes from locker room to locker room to become a locker room lawyer and express himself in a negative way. That's just not his style. But I know that he was not overwhelmed with that deal. But the fact that got him over that hump was the fact that it was a Hell in a Cell, big time build up for that gimmick match, first time ever, brand new, and Taker was in it. So Taker being in that match solved a lot of issues. If it had been Shawn and somebody else, I'm sure there could have been more of an uprising or consternation displayed. But it was Taker being in it. You approach it a little bit differently. But I could not. Bret could make a very viable argument. You could have that the Hell in a Cell match on earlier, but everybody thought it would be too hard to follow, and they were right. And so even though it wasn't the ideal way to do your lineup, I think in that case, with who all was in it and the nature of that first ever match, it was still the right thing to do.
Let's talk about the main event. We've been heading here for a while. There's so much going on with this. I guess we'll start with the beginning. Whose idea was the structure Hell in a Cell? When do you first remember that being pitched or presented? Because just a couple months prior to this, you've got Mankind and Triple H in a cage match, and it's the old big blue cage. This is the first time we see the fence and with a top on it, and it doesn't just go to the canvas; it goes around the outside. Totally different presentation. When do you remember it first coming out?
Vince told me that we're going to do this new match, and we're going to build a new cage. That's good. So it didn't have a name. It didn't have Hell in a Cell, but then obviously that evolved. But Vince told me about it, what he was going to do, and I'm sure it came from creative. The creative guys had an idea and had it planned out, because the finish the month before with a non-finish necessitated the Hell in a Cell match. And so but Vince told me about it, and like I said, I think he got it from the creative guys. He signed off on it. They blessed it. They put a top on it, and so somebody can't climb over the cage. And the beautiful part for me was it got rid of that stupid ass stipulation that you can escape the cage and win. So you can run from your fight, you can avoid, you can evade, you can retreat, you can go over the top and win. I've always thought that was a bullshit finish. I think it was put into play to appease some talents who didn't want to get pinned, thinking that they would never be the same by dropping a fall in a cage, because cages were historically used as a blow-off. The only time a heel would win is if you had a big angle and the babyface got blatantly screwed. Most babyfaces are too fragile an ego to either lose by submission and or to lose in a cage. So, but Vince told me about it, and I putting the roof on it was a real, I thought, creative idea, because it's going to look really good. And when that sumbitch lowered, man, it was impressive structure. I mean, it was kind of awe-inspiring how big this was and all that stuff. So it was just a new cage match. The old blue cage was a cage that when Hogan was the top babyface there in the territory at 300 pounds, and a lot of the guys he wrestled were in that same size, Bundy's and John Studd's and other guys, the blue cage was easier to climb, and it was easier to work around for some of those bigger guys. The fence, daunting, but daunting in a good way. The guys had to figure it out. So Shawn and Taker, I thought, for the first outing, did about as all they could do in that damn thing, because it was brand new. And what do you do? Over the years, they started putting holes in the fence so you climb it and get on top easier. Because the first time somebody tried that was, you think, my God, they're not going to be able to make this thing because there's no place to put their feet. And so that was kind of that deal. But it was unique. I was excited about it because, Conrad, it was something new.
Right.
And it made sense based on the storyline leading into it. So I kind of dug it.
Hey, does Blue Chew work? If you're asking that question, we want you to know that Blue Chew is putting their money where their mouth is by giving you a month free. Blue Chew is an online service that delivers you the same active ingredients as Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra, but at a fraction of the cost and in chewable form. The process is super simple too. You just sign up at bluechew.com. You consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA, prepared and shipped directly to your door. And the best part? Well, it's all done online. That means no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversation, no waiting in line at the pharmacy. Take them anytime, day or night, so you can plan ahead or be ready whenever an opportunity arises. Blue Chew wants men rock hard. That's what they told me. That's the mission. They will not stop until every man is bricked up like a brick house, until every tent is pitched, until every rod is raised. Discover your options at bluechew.com. And we've got a special deal for our listeners. Try Blue Chew free when you use our promo code JR at checkout. Just pay the $5 shipping. That's bluechew.com. The promo code is JR to receive your first month free. Visit bluechew.com for more details and important safety information. And we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring today's podcast.
Let's talk about the cage match and how it's put together. You said it. It's a new structure. There's a top on it. It's never been done before. These days, it feels like, before the doors opened for fans, that the guys would bring the cage down and they'd try to walk through some stuff and figure out, hey, what can we do with this thing? Were they doing that here, or were they just figuring it out in front of everybody for the very first time?
They were figuring it out as they went. They both had ideas on what they wanted to do, but they were filling out they're figuring it out and see what would work and what wouldn't work. So yeah, it was experimental, but again, you had two guys in the ring that had great ring savvy, great skill sets, and could adapt to their surroundings and their opponent. So, and Taker and Shawn did exactly that. And look, there was no love lost in that era between Taker and Shawn. There was no love lost between Shawn and anybody. Shawn was kind of a lone wolf, and really the only guy that he really associated with much was Hunter, Triple H. So it was all business, man. It was all business, and you could tell the seriousness of the match and how focused everybody was. There would be no bullshit from Shawn in that match. There would be no ha-ha, as Pat Patterson would say, or Bruce. No ha-ha. Taker was dead serious. He was losing in a crazy-ass way, but, we all thought that the Hell in a Cell would become Taker's match, much like the casket match. But then over time, he started losing some casket matches. So I thought, the Hell in a Cell is going to be Taker's specialty. And we've seen it used, obviously, more abundantly without Taker. But at that time, the first one, this is going to be Taker's new gig. And because I never thought in my wildest dreams that Shawn would beat Taker in that environment. But the way it was done was extremely creative.
Let's tell you the stipulation here, of course, is the winner is going to get a title shot against the WWF champion at Survivor Series. So Bret is the champ. The winner's going to face Bret for the belt a month later. Michaels is going to come out first with Triple H, Chyna, and Rick Rude. Of course, the Undertaker is out next, and Meltzer could not praise this enough. If you're going to watch one match this week from back in the day on this very momentous wrestling week, this is the one. The first Hell in a Cell, Ground Zero. Shawn and Undertaker go 29-59, so right at 30 minutes. Meltzer would say an absolute classic, must-see match, probably 5 stars. Michaels did everything, and then even more than everything. Of course, the big moment in the match comes when he winds up knocking down a cameraman and beating him up. That causes Sergeant Slaughter, the commissioner, to come down and open the door, which would, in theory, allow them both to leave the cage. You know what's going to happen. There's going to be the big bump off the side of the cage with Shawn through the table. But the big moment that everyone is looking for is the Undertaker and this big family secret being revealed. There's a ref bump. Undertaker does a choke slam in the middle, big chair shot to the head, and then the lights go out. And Paul Bearer brings out the debuting Kane, and Kane uses a tombstone on the Undertaker. And this allows Shawn Michaels to make the pin. So Shawn wins with interference from the debuting Kane. A lot to unpack here. We'll start with the little details. Do you know who the cameraman was? I'm sure it was one of the boys or a local talent.
I don't remember, but I remember the spot. Obviously, it was somebody that was a talent. Probably some underneath guy, I'm guessing. I don't know. But it would have been somebody that could quote unquote train to take a bump. So I remember those guys. I remember the walkthrough on blocking a shot off where this cameraman needed to be to transact his business. But I can't remember who that cameraman was, to be honest with you.
I think the bump off the side would still be one of the more spectacular bumps had the stakes not been raised so high in 9 months. Of course, in 1998 with that Hell in a Cell with Undertaker and Mankind, everything changes. But in this era, this bump with Shawn Michaels coming off the side of the cage through the announce table, it's gotta be one of the biggest bumps of the year, doesn't it?
Yeah, no doubt. It was jaw dropping, but again, you're surprised at the moment, but then going back and thinking about it, well, it shouldn't be that surprised because that's what he does. That's what we do here in this world. So, again, it's hard to fathom, Conrad, two other talents doing as well as Undertaker and Michaels in that first ever Hell in a Cell, in that environment, not knowing what worked in the past, how do we do this, how do we address the roof, how do we address getting on the outside. There's a lot of things that were unknown, but those two guys made it work. And I wonder if a lesser experienced, less seasoned talents with less feel than those two could have pulled that off. I don't think they could have.
The idea for Kane to rip off the door, I believe, was a Jim Cornette idea. He said that Kevin Sullivan debuted Doug Furnas in Knoxville years before, where the babyface is getting a beat down in the ring, and then Furnas comes out to make the save and then pulls the door off the cage. So a nice little touch to debut Kane here. Kane has been sort of in the background, as Paul Bearer has been teasing this secret all summer long. And now we finally see what the secret is. And Vince has a huge call here. That's gotta be Kane that we've seen for years and years. Glenn Jacobs, man, he was nothing if not persistent. He hung in the pocket through Isaac Yankem DDS. He somehow survived Fake Diesel in this year. And now here he is in the character that is going to make him a multi-millionaire. What do you remember about Kane, and why was Glenn Jacobs the right guy?
I met Glenn when he was wrestling for Cornette and Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And, Cornette probably had a bigger hand in what that cage was going to look like and the purpose it was going to serve than anybody on the team. He was just that amazing student of the game and was really good at that kind of thing. But I was doing some commentary for Cornette in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and that's where I met Unabomber, who was Glenn Jacobs. And then, we sat down and talked to him. He's articulate, he's intelligent, he's educated. You find out from Cornette that he's never been in a single problem about doing any finishes or showing up to work on time or any of those basic things that you want to make sure you're covered on. And I just hit it off with him really, really well. And I told Vince, I said, this guy looks like Sid in a lot of ways. He's big. He's 6'9", 6'10", somewhere in that neighborhood. He's 300 pounds. He's very athletic, played 2 sports in college. Again, he got his college degree. People say, why does J.R. Hart on this damn college degree stuff? I'll tell you why, folks. Real simple. Number one, oftentimes it indicates the intelligence level of an individual. But more importantly, it shows me that they started a project, i.e. a college education, and they finished it. Remember, quitting's the easiest thing in the world to get good at, folks. It really is. And so a guy that goes through an athletic program, a classroom work, and succeeds, uses all his eligibility, and then graduates, to me, that's the kind of guy that you can rely on. Reliability again. So I told Vince about him, and I said I would like to bring him to TV. So we had TVs coming up, I believe, in Georgia. And I want to say that we brought Glenn in to work in Augusta. Ironically, I had my big meeting with Vince back to get it all started for me there in '93. So we brought him in, and everybody loved him. He's polite, professional, on time. His gear was clean. His shoes were shined. He looked like a professional. And then, unfortunately, Carter, as you so accurately pointed out, he went through some shitty gimmicks. Dr. Yankum, really? I can see having an evil dentist with bad teeth, but when you name him something so absurdly ridiculous as Dr. Isaac Yankum, people laugh about it.
Right.
They roll their eyes on it. And you want them to hate this big monster, not laugh at him. So, Glenn, you're right. Glenn stood his ground, stood in place. It eventually worked out. And then he took ownership, did Glenn, of the Kane character. And it was absolutely wonderful. It had such an effect on Bruce, and named his son after him. Right?
Yeah, no, without a doubt. This is the character that's nearest and dearest to Bruce, and
we loved this guy. And Bruce did a real good job of helping fashion this character, because Bruce had this great relationship with Taker, probably closer than anybody on the roster. So it worked out. We all won on that deal. And the main thing is that WWE got a future Hall of Famer, after they started out in a little TV taping of 200 or 300 people there wearing a mask as the Unabomber. So it was an amazing success story. And now he's the mayor of Knox County, Tennessee. So I'm proud of Glenn. Glenn's really a star. He's a keeper. And you could get better people to come into your locker room and join the team than Glenn Jacobs. He's perfect for that deal. And that's why I always talk about guys fitting in the locker room and what is their past experiences. Can we equate being a teammate, being in a group? Well, lots of times that's in sports and organized sports. And Glenn checked all those boxes. And so one of the best, if he's not the best, he's probably the most underrated hire that I ever made. It's coming in with just a great big body and knowing he's a good human being, but can he get over? Can he develop the skill set to know how to get over and become a star? And obviously all those questions have been answered many times over.
Cornette has said that if Glenn Jacobs didn't make Kane work, he's going to be fired. Did you think going into this, as good of a guy as he was, this might be Glenn's last chance to get over?
Well, I knew, kind of like we talked earlier about Mark Henry, at some point in time, you got to fish or cut bait. And we had trained Mark so long with different guys, different coaches, that he needed to change. Glenn had been saddled with some lousy gimmicks. And a lot of guys that were more discerning, perhaps, or more egocentric would not have tolerated it, but Glenn did, and he, again, as I said earlier, he stood his ground. But I'm sure that if working with Taker as Taker's brother, that's pretty good company, man. If that didn't work, what else is there left?
Yeah.
What else can we do? I think that's kind of where we were. It wasn't because Glenn didn't know how to work, or right. Glenn was not reliable. Conrad, he just, he was saddled with some, you can't shine shit.
Right.
And that's what we were giving him at that point in time. And thank God he tolerated it, and the rest is history, as they say.
Let's talk about the look. Bruce has said that there were a couple different versions of the mask made. And, there's even a picture of him, I think in Madison Square Garden, wearing a cape to the ring. And on the original drawings that were shown recently of Kane, we would see him with a cape. What was the creative process like for, the people who were putting together the look for these characters in 1997?
Well, you get people that are, that's what they do. They are designers. Cause that mask was not, you could tell that mask was not a, idea of a talent. It was a heavy, it was leather, it stunk. And I know this because Glenn's last mask until recently, he gave to me when I opened one of my barbecue restaurants. So I still got that mask. And I can tell you that it's just, the leather and the perspiration and whatever else, blood or whatever, could have an adverse effect on its smell, its texture, drying out, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a kind of a Hollywood type presentation. And because, and I know Bruce was very involved in it because again, he had a stronger emotional investment than many. But it's outsiders doing it because I believe that if you had somebody, I wonder about Bray Wyatt's mask. If it's the same deal, it's a Hollywood creation. Is it done more in a stuntman-like deal as opposed to a functional wrestling mask? I don't know the answer to these questions, but certainly Kane's mask, he endured it, and so and I never heard him say a word about it till later on. Like, when he gave me the mask, he said, it's going to stink, JR, because you can't wash them, you can't clean them, they're leather. So I thought it was perfect. I thought it was spot on. It was great in 8x10s. It was great to walk to the ring. I'm not sure how great it was to wear night after night, but old Glenn made it work.
He would figure that out the very first night. The rumor and innuendo is when he picks Undertaker up for the tombstone, he's trying to turn him toward the hard camera, but he can't find it because the mask had moved on him. So he can't exactly see, and he's just hoping to feel it out. And I guess if you didn't know that, you just look, you think, well, he's turning around to show off how strong he is. But in reality, he's just trying to find the hard camera. And Meltzer would also say that Kane's wearing lifts in his boot here. He's already a big bastard, and now he's got lifts in here too. That's probably going to take some getting used to move around.
Yeah, it does. It messes up your equilibrium a little bit and your balance more specifically. But it was also just a part of the presentation. He needed to be big or bigger than Taker. And he was thicker than Taker, but the lifts kind of helped him out there a little bit. To me, that was splitting hairs a little bit, the lifts, but hey, look, if he can make it work, and he did, then have at it. I don't know if it was necessary, but it wasn't a bad thing.
We should also mention that, and this is kind of an interesting little footnote. The next night on Raw, that's when the guys would first call themselves D-Generation X. And we would also see on that day, Rockabilly turned against the Honky Tonk Man by hitting him over the head with a guitar, and he joins Road Dogg to form a team. So a lot happening in this era. It's fun to look back at. This is the debut of Kane, and the next day is the genesis of not only D-Generation X, but also the New Age Outlaws. So much meat on the bone this week. We hope you guys have enjoyed what we're doing here. We've had a lot of fun doing it. And I got to tell you, I'm excited for what's next on the calendar. We've got it all lined up. We'll run through some of the topics now. We're going to be doing Hell in a Cell 2009, which I'm going to tell you is probably the most recent topic I've ever covered on one of these podcasts, because Bruce was not there. So you were there. We'll get back in our Wayback Machine and talk about DX, which is Shawn Michaels and Triple H in the main event. Another Hell in a Cell, of course, against Legacy, which is Cody Rhodes and Ted DiBiase. And given what everybody's talking about this week, that should be a fun match to cover. In the undercard, we've got Kofi Kingston, Jack Swagger, and The Miz for the United States Championship. We've also got Drew McIntyre and R-Truth. We've got Randy Orton and John Cena in Hell in a Cell for the WWE Championship. We've got Big Show and Jericho taking on Batista and Rey Mysterio. Mickey James in there with Alicia Fox. John Morrison back with Dolph Ziggler. And The Undertaker is taking on CM Punk in a Hell in a Cell match too. Lots of meat on the bone, lots of stuff to talk about. What do you remember about this show? What do you think we might talk about next week?
Well, the array of talent that we had put together and their evolution, to me, is what we talk about, because the big, I don't want to say the exact beginnings, but I would say honestly, the infancy of a lot of these guys' career that were all hungry to get to the next level really took massive steps forward and upward, if you will, on this show. A lot of guys started showing Hall of Fame tendencies. A lot of guys started showing that, hey, we are ready for the main event. And that's what we needed. That's what won the Monday Night Wars, is that we got new talents over. New. Keyword here is new. And that's the same thing that, you know, the news aspect is, we're all fans of that stuff. What the fans will see all week, there's going to be a lot of surprises, a lot of new things on TV wrestling, because most bookers believe that the one way to get the audience talking is to surprise them. And I agree with that in theory, but the surprises have to be good surprises and not surprises for surprise's sake, because the fans will buy anything if it's a surprise, if it's new. And that is not true. That is not true. So, again, the steps forward in solidifying the WWE as the preeminent brand within pro wrestling, the Hall of Fame legacy of a lot of guys. The guys you mentioned, good Lord, Conrad, that's a whole Hall of Fame right there. There's a lot of guys that, you know, just that these steps in this early going is what brought them to the dance. So I love these kind of shows. And the thing about it for me is that I have never watched this show back, much like I had never watched Bad Blood until this week. That was my weekend on Sunday. So, but I love this aspect of it, because I remember things that I had heretofore had forgotten or suppressed. And, you know, like today's show, my thoughts are monopolized by Brian Pillman's death. And that was just a shame, because of all the great things that happened on the show, as far as matches and the NWA guys and all this Muchnick and his group so I'm talking about. So it was hard. It was hard to, it's hard to watch some of them, but boy, it sure is, quite frankly, at the same time, it's a hell of a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to watching this show and talking about it, trying to pick out some things that might have been overlooked, that all went in part of the building of these personas. And that's what saved our ass. That's what got us back on solid ground. And that's what helped turn the company to go from privately owned to publicly owned, where matches and pay-per-views like the ones we're going to talk about today and next week, for example, very key things to the overall long-term success and financial health of the WWE, no doubt.
Well, we appreciate you tuning in this Thursday and every Thursday right here on Westwood One. We'd be remiss if we didn't remind you we're coming to Nashville with our good friend Tony Schiavone. We're going to get together right after the AEW television presentation. Circle your calendars now. It's November 13th at Zany's in Nashville. Tickets are on sale now at supershowlive.com. That's supershowlive.com. On the heels of a big TV show, you know, there's no telling who might stop by, but I know you're stopping by this weekend, man. You're going to be down in Alabama, and you're going to be at Fanaticon. I
am. Fanaticon in Dothan. I'll be there Saturday and Sunday with our good friend Raphael Morphy, one of the big pieces of the backbone of AEW, quite frankly. Raphael and I are going to go from D.C. to Dothan. Probably won't even notice the difference in culture. I'm not kidding. Washington, D.C. to Dothan, Alabama. But I'm looking forward to going down, and we're bringing our barbecue sauces and all of our condiments and books. And we're going to sign your swag at this event in Dothan. Is just, I'm looking forward. We've been talking about it a long time, so it's finally here this weekend. Family fun, affordable. Come out and join us. Come out and say hello on Saturday and Sunday in Dothan at Fanaticon. I think you'll have a great time, and I'd love to see some of y'all.
Set your calendar, man. Next week, Hell in a Cell 2009. After that, we'll cruise through Taboo Tuesday 04, In Your House Buried Alive 96, Halloween Havoc 89, hashtag Ask JR Anything, Clash of the Champions 9, which was New York Knockout with Flair and Funk, Survivor Series 95, and we'll round up November with an episode dedicated to Jerry Lawler. So set your calendar, tell your friends, hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you next week and every week right here on Grillin' JR with Jim Ross.
Have I told you what I'm helping people with in my real life? Yeah, I'm helping them save money over at savewithconrad.com. If you haven't already, what are you waiting for? Go get yourself a quick quote. Interest rates have improved and people are realizing, hey, now's a chance to save some cash. And I'm talking to you, if you're still on the fence about buying a house, we can get you out of that apartment, tell your landlord to kiss your grits, and get you into a brand new house. You can do that with 5% down, with 3.5% down. And yes, there are still no money down options available in 2024. SaveWithConrad.com is your first step. We're going to ask you, hey, where are you now and where would you like to be? And we're going to get you on a path to fit those short-term goals, but really meet the long-term goal that we all want. And that's to appreciate the American dream. The American dream isn't to give 29% of your gross monthly income every month until you die to some banker. No, you want to own that thing for real. Your own piece of land for you and your family, your legacy. And we want to help you get one for yourself at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. You don't need money out of your pocket. And maybe you've already got a house, but it'd be nice if you could pay a little less. We're routinely finding a way to help our podcast listeners combine all of their debt, and I mean all of it. Credit cards, personal loans, even car payments. Get it into one low monthly payment. Not only is it a better interest rate, it's also a greater tax deduction, but maybe most importantly, a much cheaper payment. We're routinely helping our podcast listeners save $500, $600, $700, even $800 a month. But how much can you save? Find out right now at savewithconrad.com.
You guys, the housing market's really good right now, too, for you folks out there that are thinking of making a change in your overhead or your living conditions. Now's not a bad time to make that move. Nowhere better to do it than savewithconrad.com. He's going to save you money. He's going to be honest. And it's like dealing with a friend, an educated friend. And boy, there's a lot of uneducated and unfriendly people in that world. Conrad Thompson is not one of them.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Jim. Check out our reviews online. You're going to see we've got more than 1,000 5-star reviews. Customer service is what it's all about. We want to be your mortgage advisor for life. So there's no application fee. There's no credit report fee. We just want to talk, man. Hey, tell us where you are and tell us where you want to be, and we'll try to help you get a plan to get there. We want to be your advocate, your humble advocate at savewithconrad.com.
Attaboy, Connie. Look at those cheeks, ladies. Look at those cheeks, ladies and gentlemen. My God.
How could you say no to that, right?
NMLS number 2129, Equal Housing Lender.
SaveWithConrad.com.